You've been taught to worry, to plan, to control, to fix every little thing before it falls apart. They told you that if you care enough, prepare enough, try hard enough, you'll finally feel safe. But you don't, do you? Your mind keeps spinning even when everything looks fine. You lie awake, thinking about what could go wrong, what you should have said, what you might lose. And deep down, you know, this isn't living. It's surviving on fear, disguised as responsibility. The truth is, peace doesn't come from solving every problem. It comes from seeing that most of them were never real to begin with. The Buddhists knew this long before psychology gave it a name. They understood that worry is just the mind trying to play God, trying to control what was never meant to be controlled. And when you stop fighting life, something miraculous happens. The storm quiets, the noise fades, and underneath it all, there's a stillness, calm, clear, alive. This book isn't about escaping your problems. It's about meeting them differently. Seeing through the illusions that make you anxious, learning to let go before life forces you to, and finding happiness not in what changes, but in what's unshakably present. Tonight, as you read these words, you'll start to notice it. A soft shift inside you. Your breath slows, your shoulders drop. The war in your mind starts to lose its fuel. And tomorrow, when the same problems appear, they won't feel as heavy. You'll respond with clarity instead of panic. You'll see that peace was never something to chase. It was who you were underneath the noise all along. Are you ready to remember? Let's begin. Before we begin, take a deep breath. Feel the air move in and out. The mind may still be holding on to the words you've just read, the quiet promise of peace beneath all the noise. You might feel something stirring, a recognition, a small opening, as if your heart knows this journey isn't about learning something new, but remembering something ancient. What if everything you've been doing to protect yourself, the worrying, the planning, the overthinking, was the very thing standing between you and peace? What if worry wasn't compassion at all, but pride in disguise? That's where our journey truly begins. Worry feels noble. It wears the mask of love, responsibility, and duty. You worry about your family because you care. You worry about the future because you want to be prepared. You worry about the world because you want to make it better. But look closer and you'll see something deeper hiding beneath that surface, a subtle whisper of control. The mind says, if I don't worry, everything will fall apart. That belief is not love, it's fear pretending to be virtue. This hidden arrogance of worry is one of the most overlooked traps of the human mind. It's arrogance, not in the loud, boastful sense, but in the quiet conviction that life cannot go on without our constant interference. We believe our worry keeps people safe, keeps situations under control, and keeps the future secure. But when we look closely, we see that worry doesn't actually change reality. It only distorts our perception of it. It drains the present moment of its peace and replaces it with illusion. Buddhism teaches that this illusion comes from the ego, the false sense of I. The ego is like a small king ruling over an imaginary kingdom. It says, I am responsible for everything. I must protect, fix, manage, and prevent pain. It means well. It wants safety, certainty, recognition. but it forgets something essential. The world is vast, and life unfolds according to its own intelligence, not our constant management. When you worry, what you're really saying is, I don't trust life. I don't trust people. I don't trust that things can work out unless I control them. That's not compassion. That's separation. True compassion flows from connection, from seeing yourself and others as part of one living system. But worry builds walls. It says, you and I are separate. I must save you. It quietly positions the worrier as superior, as someone who knows better than life itself. Think about how often worry disguises itself as love. A mother says, I just worry because I care. But beneath that care is often fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being powerless. She worries not only for the child's safety, but for her own identity as a good parent. A partner says, I worry about you because I love you. But sometimes that worry hides an unconscious need to control the other person's choices, emotions, or growth. In both cases, worry becomes a shadow of love. It looks like care, but it's laced with attachment. Buddhist psychology calls this attachment upadana, the clinging that leads to suffering. Worry is one of its most subtle forms because it feels moral. It makes us feel useful, even righteous. The mind says, if I stop worrying, it means I don't care. But that's a lie. You can care deeply without being consumed by fear. You can act wisely without being driven by anxiety. The Buddha taught that every emotion has two levels, the surface reaction and the underlying belief. Worry's surface is agitation, the racing thoughts, the tightening chest. But underneath lies belief. If I don't think about this, something bad will happen. That belief is the ego's desperate attempt to make itself the center of the universe. It wants to feel indispensable. It wants to feel like it matters more than anything else. This is where the hidden arrogance lies. Worry tells us, you are the one holding the world together. But life was flowing long before you arrived and will continue long after you're gone. When we forget that, we become slaves to our own importance. Worry is not humility. It's the ego pretending to be selfless. True humility is trusting the intelligence of the present moment, acting when it's time to act, and surrendering when it's time to let go. It takes courage to see through the ego's disguise, because when you stop worrying, there's a strange emptiness at first, as if you've abandoned something important. The mind will whisper, you're being careless. You don't care enough. But what's actually happening is freedom. You're learning to care without clinging. You're learning to act without attachment to the result. Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh once said, worrying does not take away tomorrow's troubles. It takes away today's peace. And that's the quiet tragedy of worry. It wastes your life in imaginary battles. The things you fear rarely happen the way you imagine, yet the suffering is real because your mind rehearses it every day. It's like living inside a movie that never ends, and you're both the actor and the audience, watching yourself suffer. So, what's the alternative? Awareness. The moment you become aware that you're worrying, you step outside of it. You move from being inside the storm to watching it from a distance. In that awareness, you realize, this is not love, this is fear. And that simple recognition begins to dissolve it. Awareness doesn't fight worry, it illuminates it. When you see worry clearly, without judging it, it starts to lose its grip. The ego thrives in unconsciousness. It loves when you identify with every anxious thought as me. It wants you to believe that you are your worry, that your fear equals your love, that your control equals your safety. But when you bring mindful attention to it, something profound happens. You begin to see the space between you and your thoughts. You start to sense the stillness beneath the noise. And from that stillness, wisdom arises. The wisdom that knows when to act and when to release. Let's take an example. You're worried about someone you love who's going through a hard time. Your instinct is to fix their pain, to offer advice, to intervene. But often, that intervention comes from your own discomfort with their suffering. You want them to be happy so you can stop feeling uneasy. Compassion becomes conditional. True compassion, on the other hand, allows space for others to have their experience. It trusts their path, their process, their lessons. It doesn't need to control the outcome. In Zen practice, this is called non-clinging compassion. You can care without holding. You can love without owning. When you live from this space, you're not trying to manipulate life into matching your idea of how it should be. You're meeting life as it is and responding with wisdom instead of fear. Every act of worry reinforces the illusion that you are separate from life. It's as if the ocean forgot it was water and started trying to control its own waves. But you can't control the tide. You can only move with it. When you stop worrying, you don't become careless. You become aligned. You start participating in life instead of resisting it. There's a quiet power in that alignment. You begin to notice how the universe has its own rhythm, its own intelligence. Flowers bloom without your management. The sun rises without your effort. Your heart beats without your permission. Life doesn't need your constant supervision. It just needs your participation, your presence. And yet, the ego resists this truth. It says, if I don't plan, things will fall apart. But Buddhist practice teaches us that planning and worrying are not the same. Planning is practical. It's an act of wisdom. Worrying is emotional attachment to the plan. It's fear wearing the clothes of preparation. You can plan carefully, then release it. That's balance, intention without control. The arrogance of worry often hides in small habits. When you replay a conversation in your head, trying to figure out if someone misunderstood you, that's ego. When you check your phone every few minutes waiting for a reply, that's ego. When you rehearse future arguments that may never happen, that's ego again. It's subtle, relentless, always looking for a way to reassert control. But when you see it clearly, you begin to smile at it. You realize it's not personal. It's just the human mind doing what it's been conditioned to do. In Buddhist philosophy, there's a term called dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately meaning unsatisfactoriness. Worry is a form of dukkha, a refusal to rest in the present, because the mind insists something's missing or could go wrong. The more you feed it, the more it grows. But when you acknowledge it with awareness, it begins to dissolve, like mist in sunlight. The practice, then, is simple, but not easy. Notice your worry without feeding it. Don't label it as bad or good, just see it. Feel how it tightens your chest, how it narrows your breath, how it creates distance between you and life. Then breathe into it. Every breath is a gentle reminder that you're here, now, safe. Slowly, the energy that was trapped in worry begins to transform into presence. Presence is the antidote to arrogance. It doesn't claim to know or control, it simply is. When you live in presence, you no longer feel the need to manage life. You flow with it. And that flow is where real peace lives. Another layer of this hidden arrogance is moral superiority. The warrior often believes they're the only one who truly cares, the only one who takes things seriously. But beneath that is a quiet judgment. Others are too careless. If I don't worry, no one will. This thought isolates you. It builds a wall between you and the world. Yet, when you see that everyone is walking their own path, guided by their own lessons, you start to soften. You begin to realize that no one is meant to carry the entire weight of life, not even you. Worry also gives a false sense of purpose. It fills empty moments with noise, so you don't have to face silence. But silence is where you meet yourself. It's where you discover that peace isn't passive. It's profoundly alive. In that quiet space, you realize that life has been taking care of itself all along. You don't need to add more effort. You need to remove what blocks the natural flow. When the mind finally releases its grip, a new kind of clarity appears. Not the clarity of solving everything, but the clarity of seeing that nothing was ever missing. You become lighter, more open, more kind. You no longer carry the world on your shoulders. You walk beside it, hand in hand. And that's the paradox. When you stop trying to fix everything, you actually become more effective. Your actions come from peace, not panic. Your words carry calm authority instead of anxious urgency. People trust you more, not because you control, but because you radiate presence. In that state, love becomes spacious. Care becomes intelligent. You act from wisdom, not fear. And slowly, the illusion of separation, the root of all worry, begins to fade. You see that you were never apart from life. You were never in charge of it, nor outside of it. You were always part of the same vast, breathing whole. The mind may still whisper, but what if? That's okay. You don't need to silence it. You just don't need to believe it. Each time worry arises, treat it like an old friend who means well but doesn't know any better. Smile, thank it for trying to protect you, and gently return to the present. That's the beginning of true freedom. Compassion without clinging, love without control, and responsibility without arrogance. As you rest in that understanding, you begin to sense something profound. That peace was never something you had to earn. It was waiting beneath the noise, beneath the thoughts, beneath the need to manage life. And as that realization settles, the edges of your worry begin to dissolve into stillness. The mind grows quiet. The heart expands. And in that stillness, you finally understand. Letting go isn't losing control. It's remembering that you never had to hold it all in the first place. When the weight of control begins to loosen and the noise of worry fades into the background, something quiet starts to reveal itself. A pulse, a rhythm, a constant movement beneath everything you thought was still. It's life breathing, shifting, flowing through every thought, every breath, every heartbeat. You start to see that the peace you've been seeking doesn't come from holding on, but from letting things move as they are meant to. What if letting go wasn't a loss, but a law, the most natural law of all? Letting go is not a decision you make once. It's a living process, a kind of internal physics that governs every aspect of existence. The Buddha didn't speak about impermanence as an abstract concept to be admired from afar. He invited us to see it directly, to feel it in the rise and fall of the breath, in the flicker of thought, in the birth and death of every feeling. It's not philosophy, it's reality unfolding moment by moment. Most of our suffering comes from misunderstanding this law. We think life should be stable, people should stay the same, love should last forever, success should remain fixed. But everything in nature tells a different story. The ocean never holds the same wave twice. The flame that burns brightly also consumes itself. Every exhale is a tiny death that makes room for new life. Yet, the human mind resists this truth. It clings, it stores, it memorizes, it holds, terrified that letting go means losing. But what if the opposite is true? What if clinging is what causes loss, and letting go is what allows life to stay alive within you? The essence of Buddhist practice is not to detach coldly from life, but to participate fully in its flow, to love deeply, act fully, and yet not grasp what cannot be kept. Think about the breath. Every inhale feels like taking in life. Every exhale feels like giving it back. But if you tried to hold your breath, even the breath that keeps you alive would turn into suffocation. That's the same law that governs every other aspect of being. You can't hold on to joy without killing it. You can't hold on to love without freezing it. You can't hold on to peace without disturbing it. This is the physics of letting go. For every grasp, there is tension. For every release, expansion. When you cling, energy contracts. When you let go, energy flows. The universe itself moves this way. Galaxies expand and dissolve. Stars are born and die. Seasons rotate in endless cycles. The same happens within your thoughts and emotions. What you call me is not a fixed thing, but a constantly moving stream. To resist impermanence is to resist the truth of your own nature. Letting go, then, is not passive. It's the most courageous form of participation in life. It means saying yes to the entire process, not just the parts that feel good, but also the endings, the changes, the unknowns. When something ends, the ego says, "This shouldn't happen." But awareness says, "This is part of the flow." People often ask, "How do I let go?" as if it were a technique or a button to press. But letting go is not something you do. It's something that happens when you see clearly. The more you observe the impermanence of things, the more naturally your grip loosens. Watch your breath for 5 minutes, and you'll see the rise and fall of life. Watch your emotions, and you'll notice they never stay still. Even sadness moves. Even pain has texture and rhythm. The practice is to notice. Notice how your mind tries to hold on to an opinion, a memory, an identity. Notice the subtle tightening that happens when someone disagrees with you, or when the future feels uncertain. That tightening is the body's physical echo of the mind's refusal to let things flow. Each time you see it, breathe into it. Each time you breathe, you practice dying, not in the morbid sense, but in the way a leaf falls effortlessly when the wind changes direction. Letting go also reveals something extraordinary about awareness itself. When you release your attachment to thoughts and emotions, what remains is a silent witness, pure consciousness that doesn't age, doesn't cling, doesn't break. That's who you truly are. Everything else, names, roles, memories, are passing clouds. The more you recognize this, the less frightened you become of change. Change isn't the enemy, it's the heartbeat of life. You were never meant to be static. You were designed to evolve, to shed, to transform. The fear of impermanence comes from the illusion that there's a solid self that can be lost. But the Buddha pointed to anatta, no fixed self. That doesn't mean you don't exist. It means you're fluid, like water. You take the shape of each moment and then return to the vastness of awareness. When you see impermanence clearly, relationships change. You stop holding people hostage to your expectations. You love them as they are, in motion, in flux, in their own evolution. You stop demanding forever and start honoring the beauty of for now. You understand that to truly love someone is to allow them to change, to let them come and go freely, without turning their presence into your possession. In this way, impermanence deepens love. It gives it urgency, tenderness, truth. When you know that nothing lasts, you stop taking moments for granted. You become present in a way you never were before. You start to see beauty in everything, even in endings, because endings reveal what was once alive. You begin to say thank you instead of please stay. Letting go also transforms how we handle pain. The mind resists pain because it wants permanence in comfort. But pain, like everything else, moves. No emotion lasts forever unless you hold on to it. When you let pain flow, it carries you somewhere, toward understanding, toward empathy, toward peace. Every emotion, when allowed to complete its cycle, dissolves into clarity. But if you trap it with resistance, it festers. The same applies to happiness. You can't cling to joy. You can only experience it as it passes through. Trying to hold on to happiness turns it into fear, fear that it might end. But happiness is not something to possess. It's a visitor, a wave. Let it move through you, and it leaves behind something quieter and more lasting: contentment. Contentment is the equilibrium that comes from understanding the law of impermanence. It's not dull acceptance, it's graceful alignment. You don't stop dreaming or caring. You just stop demanding that life obey your timeline. You trust the unfolding. You realize that what leaves creates space for what's next. Every spiritual tradition points to this truth in its own language. Physics calls it entropy, the constant transformation of energy. Nature calls it seasons. Buddhism calls it anicca, impermanence. And you, as part of this great web, are subject to the same law. You shed skin, you breathe in and out, you lose and find, you live and die in countless small ways every day. Look closely, and you'll see impermanence even in thought. One moment you feel certain, the next uncertain. One moment angry, the next calm. Your opinions, memories, even your sense of self, all of it flickers. Yet beneath that flicker, something remains constant: awareness. That's the paradox. Everything changes, and yet something observes that change. Awareness is not separate from impermanence. It's the field in which impermanence happens. It's like the sky watching clouds drift by. So, letting go doesn't mean rejecting what's passing. It means recognizing that you were never separate from the flow in the first place. You were never the one holding life together. Life was holding you. You are not the owner of your experiences. You are the space through which they pass. The practice of letting go becomes even more powerful when you bring it into micro-moments, the small, invisible spaces that make up a day. When you sip your tea, notice how the warmth fades with each second. When you speak, notice how each word dissolves as soon as it's heard. When you look at someone, notice how their expression subtly changes from moment to moment. Everything is moving, even what looks still. That awareness is liberation. It frees you from trying to trap time. You stop clinging to moments because you see that they were never yours. They belong to the river of existence. And you, too, are a ripple in that river, beautiful precisely because you can never be repeated. This understanding reshapes your relationship with death. Death stops being an interruption and becomes a continuation of the same movement you've been living all along: transformation. When you understand impermanence, death is not the opposite of life. It's part of life's rhythm. Just as sleep is part of waking, death is part of living. Knowing this doesn't make you morbid, it makes you grateful. You start to live more fully because you're no longer pretending you have forever. Buddhism teaches that the mind clings not only to people and things, but to experiences, emotions, even enlightenment. The desire to stay peaceful can become its own form of attachment. But real peace is dynamic. It breathes. It's alive. You can't freeze it. When you notice yourself trying to hold on to stillness, gently release it too. Let peace move through you like wind, felt but not possessed. In this flow, even suffering transforms. You begin to see how every loss, every disappointment, every heartbreak was not punishment, but participation in life's larger rhythm. You see how every ending cleared space for something new to arise. Life was never taking things from you, it was making room. When you live this way, control no longer feels necessary. You act, but without tension. You plan, but without fear. You love, but without ownership. You become like a tree, grounded yet flexible, moving with the wind, but rooted in awareness. That's the true strength of letting go, softness that doesn't break. Every breath becomes a teacher. Every change becomes a reminder. The universe is constantly whispering the same lesson. Nothing is permanent. Let it flow. When you align with that truth, your suffering softens. You stop clinging to what was or grasping for what might be. You start to dance with what is, and that dance is sacred. It's not chaotic, it's perfectly ordered. Every rise has its fall, every fall its rise. Every meeting contains its farewell, every farewell seeds a new meeting. This is the rhythm of reality. When you resist it, you suffer. When you move with it, you are free. There's a deep serenity in living this way. You stop needing guarantees. You stop fighting time. You start to trust that even loss has its own intelligence. You see that every emotion is a messenger, not a mistake. You learn to stay open as life unfolds, even when it unfolds differently than you hoped. That openness is the essence of Buddhist wisdom. It's not withdrawal, it's full participation. You're not running from the world, but flowing with it. You feel everything: joy, sorrow, love, loss, but you don't become any of it. You are the space in which it all comes and goes. This is the living experiment of impermanence. Every day gives you thousands of opportunities to see it, in the fading of light, the cooling of coffee, the softening of anger, the shifting of thoughts. Each observation is a small liberation. You don't need to change the world, you just need to see it clearly. When you do, life stops being something to manage and starts being something to marvel at. You begin to notice the quiet miracle in everything, that the same universe that destroys also creates, the same river that takes also gives, the same impermanence that scares you also frees you. Letting go, then, isn't the end of caring. It's the beginning of wisdom. It's the art of participating fully while holding nothing too tightly. It's the willingness to love, to lose, to begin again, endlessly. And when you live this way, you stop being afraid of change because you realize you are change, constantly reborn in each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of awareness. You start to see that life is not something happening to you. Life is you, unfolding, dissolving, renewing, forever in motion. The fear of impermanence was never about losing life. It was about misunderstanding it. Because once you see that everything moves, you no longer seek stability in the temporary. You find it in awareness itself, the silent witness that never leaves, no matter what rises or falls. That awareness is your true home. It doesn't cling, it doesn't chase, it simply watches, calm, steady, infinite. And from that still point, you can finally see, letting go isn't giving up, it's waking up. When you start to live with the rhythm of impermanence, something inside you softens. You begin to notice that holding on, even to love, feels heavy. The truth that once seemed terrifying now starts to feel like freedom. You realize that if everything changes, then love must change too. It can no longer be about possession or control. It becomes something lighter, purer, freer. The next step, then, is to understand what it means to love without clinging, to care deeply without turning that care into suffering. We grow up believing that love is proven by attachment. We say, "I love you so much, I can't live without you," as if dependence were a virtue. We confuse intensity with depth, worry with affection, and control with protection. But love, as taught in Buddhist practice, is not about owning outcomes. It's about freeing both yourself and the one you love from the prison of expectation. It's compassion without chains, care that doesn't demand a return, attention that doesn't seek validation, warmth that doesn't burn with anxiety. When you start to see how impermanence works, you understand why clinging destroys love. Everything you hold too tightly eventually breaks. Not because it's weak, but because your grasp suffocates it. You can't hold a flower without crushing it, and you can't hold a person's happiness without dimming their light. True compassion gives others space to grow, fall, and rise again, without making their journey about your comfort. This is one of the hardest lessons to embody because love feels personal. It feels like mine. You love your partner, your child, your friend, and your heart says, "I want them to be happy." But beneath that noble wish hides a subtle demand. I want them to be happy the way I think they should be. And there it is, attachment disguised as care. The moment love becomes about how someone should feel, act, or live, it stops being love and becomes ownership. In Buddhism, compassion, karuna, is not sentimental, it's intelligent. It arises from wisdom, from seeing that all beings suffer because they cling to impermanent things. To love someone with wisdom is to want their freedom, not their compliance. It means you support their path, even when it leads away from you. It means you wish them happiness, even if it doesn't include your version of it. That kind of love is rare because it asks you to let go of self-centered desire, to love for the sake of love itself, not for the comfort it gives your ego. When you love without clinging, you stop measuring the worth of your care by how it is received. You begin to give because giving feels natural, not because you expect appreciation. The ego's version of love is transactional. I love you, so you should love me back. Real compassion doesn't follow that logic. It says, I love you, and that's enough. This doesn't make you weak or naive. It makes you free. You no longer depend on external reactions to feel complete. Emotional ownership is one of the subtlest traps of human relationships. You may not realize how often you take responsibility for someone else's emotions. When someone you care about is sad, your mind rushes in to fix it. You feel their pain as your own, and you tell yourself that unless they're happy, you can't be at peace. But that's not compassion, that's entanglement. It's an unconscious belief that your well-being depends on their emotional state. In truth, every person's happiness is their own journey. You can walk beside them, offer support, and radiate kindness, but you cannot carry their suffering for them. You can't take away their lessons without taking away their growth. When you understand this, you stop rescuing people from the very experiences that will awaken them. You begin to love with open hands, supportive but not grasping. This doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. Detachment in Buddhism doesn't mean indifference, it means balance. It's the space between love and control. It allows you to feel everything fully, but without drowning in it. When someone you love suffers, you feel compassion, but you don't make their suffering your identity. You can hold their pain gently, knowing that it's part of their evolution. You can be present without losing yourself. To cultivate compassion without clinging, start by observing how attachment appears in small moments. When your child cries, notice your impulse to immediately fix it. When your partner seems distant, notice how your mind starts building stories. Did I do something wrong? Do they still care? Those stories are attachment in motion. They're not love, they're the fear of loss. The key is to pause before reacting. Breathe, feel the discomfort, allow the emotion to be there without acting from it. That pause is where wisdom enters. It's where you realize that love doesn't need to control. It only needs to understand. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to listen without offering advice, to hold someone's hand without trying to rearrange their world. Compassion is not fixing, it's witnessing. It's the willingness to sit with another person's pain without needing it to disappear. In Buddhist texts, there's a practice called metta bhavana, or loving kindness meditation. It begins with wishing well for yourself. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. Then it expands to others, friends, strangers, even enemies. What's profound about this practice is that it teaches you to love without boundaries, without conditions. You don't say, "May you be happy if you do what I want." You say, "May you be happy," period. That's pure compassion, love stripped of self-interest. This form of compassion changes how you relate to everyone. You stop labeling people as mine. You see that each being is walking their own path through joy and pain, guided by their own karma, their own lessons. You stop interfering with that process and start respecting it. That respect is sacred. It says, "I trust your journey even when I don't understand it." Many people fear that if they stop attaching, they'll stop caring. But the opposite happens. When you let go of ownership, love expands. It's no longer limited by expectation or fear. You begin to care for everyone, not just those who serve your emotional needs. Compassion becomes universal. You start to see that all beings, human, animal, even those who've hurt you, are driven by the same longing for happiness. That recognition breaks down the walls of separation and reveals the shared vulnerability of life. You can test this understanding in daily life. When someone disappoints you, instead of closing your heart, notice what's happening inside. The mind says, "They shouldn't have done that." But underneath, what's really being hurt is the ego's attachment to a certain image. They should behave in a way that keeps me comfortable. When you see that clearly, compassion arises naturally. You realize they're acting from their own conditioning, their own confusion, their own suffering. And that awareness transforms judgment into empathy. This doesn't mean tolerating harm or allowing abuse. Boundaries are not the opposite of compassion. They're an expression of it. To love wisely, you must also protect what's sacred, your peace, your dignity, your truth. But you can do so without hatred. You can walk away from someone and still wish them well. That's love without ownership. The ability to care without clinging, to protect without resentment. When you love this way, relationships stop being cages and become mirrors. They show you where you're still attached, where you still seek validation. Every emotional reaction becomes a teacher, pointing to the parts of you that confuse love with control. You learn to hold people in your heart, not in your hands. You stop saying, "You belong to me," and start saying, "We are walking together for now." Even grief transforms through this understanding. When you lose someone you love, the pain can feel unbearable because the ego screams, "They were mine." But if you rest in awareness, you start to sense something beyond loss, a continuation. Their form may be gone, but the love remains. The kindness they gave you, the lessons they taught you, the joy you shared, all of it becomes part of the flow of existence. In that realization, grief turns into gratitude. You see that love never ends. It only changes shape. Compassion without clinging also extends inward. Many people are harsh with themselves, constantly trying to fix, perfect, or punish their inner world. But you cannot give true compassion to others if you withhold it from yourself. Start by noticing how you relate to your own pain. Do you reject it, criticize it, or drown in it? True self-compassion means neither avoiding nor indulging suffering. It means acknowledging it with gentleness. It says, yes, I'm hurting, and that's part of being human. When you practice this inner gentleness, your capacity for outer compassion grows naturally. You become less reactive, more understanding. You stop needing others to behave a certain way to validate your worth. You become anchored in kindness, not in approval. That's the real foundation of peace. Love that doesn't depend on outcomes. There's a story from the Buddhist tradition about a monk who carried a woman across a river because she couldn't cross on her own. Hours later, his companion said, "I can't believe you touched a woman. That's against our vows." The monk smiled and replied, "I set her down at the riverbank, but you're still carrying her." That's the difference between compassion and attachment. Compassion helps, acts, gives, and then lets go. Attachment holds on, replays, and identifies. When you start living from compassion, your energy shifts. You stop moving through life as a collector of emotional debts. You give freely, and because you expect nothing, you are never disappointed. People sense this freedom in you. They trust you more because your love doesn't come with strings. You become a safe space, someone whose presence doesn't demand, only uplifts. In that state, every interaction becomes a form of meditation. When you speak, you listen deeply. When you help, you do it without hidden motives. When you walk away, you do so with peace, not guilt. This is love in its highest form, love that liberates both giver and receiver. The beauty of compassion without clinging is that it connects you to something larger than personal relationships. You begin to see the whole world as your field of care. The bird outside your window, the stranger on the street, the earth itself, all become part of your heart. You realize that compassion is not an emotion, but a state of being, a natural expression of awareness. When you reach this understanding, worry dissolves on its own. You no longer obsess over whether people will change, whether things will last, whether outcomes will match your desires. You act from love, not fear. You wish well, you give your best, and then you release it. That's the deepest trust, not in people, but in life itself. Loving without owning outcomes doesn't make life dull or distant. It makes it sacred. Every act of care becomes an offering to the universe. Every goodbye becomes a gentle bow. You stop chasing permanence in others and start finding it in the space of awareness that holds it all. In that space, there is no loss, no separation, no demand. Only the pure warmth of being. This is the essence of Buddhist compassion, to love so fully that you can let go, to give so deeply that you need nothing in return, and to care so wisely that your presence becomes peace itself. That's not detachment. That's the highest form of connection, the kind that asks for nothing and therefore loses nothing. And as you move forward on this path, you begin to see how this kind of love changes everything. Your relationships, your work, even the way you breathe. It teaches you that peace isn't found in holding on, but in opening up. And the more you open, the more love flows through you, endless, effortless, unconditional. When love becomes free from ownership, something remarkable begins to unfold. The heart, once heavy with attachment, starts to breathe. You no longer measure your worth by what stays or leaves. Compassion turns into spaciousness, And in that space, you begin to hear a new silence, the quiet hum of contentment. It's gentle, almost hidden, but once you feel it, you recognize it as the essence of peace. That silence whispers one word that the restless mind rarely understands: enough. To live with a sense of enough is not resignation, it's liberation. The world constantly tells you that you must do more, have more, become more. The noise of modern life thrives on dissatisfaction. Every advertisement, every comparison, every social cue repeats the same message. You are not enough until you achieve something else. But the mind that always wants more never rests. It runs from moment to moment like a thirsty traveler in a desert, drinking mirages. In Buddhist teaching, this craving is called tanha, thirst. It's not just the desire for pleasure or material things, but the subtle inability to be content with what is. Even spiritual seeking can become a form of tanha when it's driven by the idea that peace is somewhere else. The Buddha called this the root of suffering because craving creates the illusion of lack. You believe peace will come once you reach the next milestone: a better job, a perfect relationship, a quieter mind. But when you get there, the mind simply moves the goalpost. The cycle continues endlessly. The wisdom of enough is not about renouncing life or rejecting desire. It's about redefining the nature of desire itself. Instead of grasping, it becomes participation. Instead of hunger, it becomes appreciation. When you live from inner sufficiency, you no longer chase life. You meet it. You don't reject beauty or pleasure, but you stop making them conditions for happiness. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of the middle way: not indulgence, not denial, but balance. Contentment is not stagnation. It's motion in harmony. It's like a river flowing steadily, not too fast, not too still. The mind that knows contentment is creative, alive, and peaceful. It doesn't withdraw from life. It engages fully without losing its center. You can work hard, pursue goals, love deeply, and still be rooted in enoughness. This is contentment in motion, the quiet revolution of living without constant lack. When you begin to see life this way, even simple moments become rich. Drinking tea, watching sunlight move across the wall, hearing someone laugh. These are no longer background details. They become the essence of living. You realize that nothing is missing right here, and that realization doesn't make you passive, it makes you free. But reaching this state requires unlearning centuries of conditioning. Society trains the mind to equate happiness with accumulation. From a young age, we are taught to compete, to compare, to measure worth through status and success. The mind internalizes this, turning every act into a transaction. You study not to learn, but to get ahead. You work not to contribute, but to acquire. Even rest becomes another achievement. I meditate to be more productive. This restless economy of desire is what keeps modern anxiety alive. It's not just about material wealth, it's psychological. We crave validation, attention, progress. Even when our physical needs are met, our emotional hunger keeps growing. It's like eating salt water. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. Buddhist economics offers a radical alternative. Wealth measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you can enjoy without clinging. In this view, Simplicity is not deprivation, but sophistication, the ability to find joy without dependence. You start to realize that happiness is not expensive, it's simply hidden under layers of wanting. To understand this deeply, look at the nature of desire itself. Desire is energy. It moves, it vibrates. When it flows naturally, it creates creativity, love, and growth. But when it becomes distorted by attachment, it turns into greed and worry. The difference lies in direction. One flows outward with generosity, the other contracts inward with fear. The Buddha didn't teach the end of desire, but the end of craving. Desire can be skillful when it's rooted in awareness. You can desire to help, to create, to evolve, without becoming enslaved by the result. But craving is blind. It says, "I'll only be happy when this happens," and that "when" becomes a trap. One of the most powerful ways to work with this is through gratitude. Gratitude is not just a polite thank you, it's a way of seeing. It trains the mind to recognize fullness instead of lack. When you appreciate what is here, desire loses its sharpness. You still move, still grow, but the movement is joyful, not desperate. Gratitude turns life into sufficiency. It dissolves the illusion that happiness is somewhere else. Try it for a day. Every time your mind says, "I wish I had," pause and name 3 things you already have that support your life: your breath, your body, the warmth of sunlight. This isn't about pretending you don't have goals. It's about grounding those goals in peace instead of anxiety. You start to act not because you're empty, but because you're overflowing. In this state, your relationship with possessions changes. You stop defining yourself by what you own. You can enjoy things without being owned by them. You can have wealth without arrogance and simplicity without pride. This balance is what Buddhist teachers call santuti, contentment born of understanding. It's the quiet recognition that peace cannot be purchased because it's never been for sale. When you see the truth of santuti, even success feels different. You no longer chase achievements as proof of worth. They become expressions of your inner abundance. You still build, create, strive, but with ease, not desperation. You work because it brings meaning, not because you fear being left behind. You rest because rest is part of life, not a luxury earned through exhaustion. There's a story in Buddhist tradition about a rich man who approached a monk, complaining that despite all his wealth, he felt empty. The monk offered him a cup of tea and kept pouring until the tea spilled over. "Stop," said the man. "It's already full." The monk smiled. "So are you. There's no space for peace because you keep filling yourself with wanting." The lesson wasn't against wealth. It was against excess, the kind that leaves no space for stillness. True abundance begins when you recognize that nothing external can complete what was never broken. The mind addicted to more can never rest because it keeps moving the finish line. It says, "I'll be happy when," and then changes the condition. The only way to end this game is to stop playing it. You stop asking, "What's missing?" and start asking, "What's already here?" This shift also transforms relationships. When you feel whole, you no longer approach others from emptiness. You stop expecting them to complete you. You love from fullness, not need. You give without calculation because giving feels natural. And paradoxically, this fullness attracts genuine connection. People are drawn to those who don't demand, who radiate quiet sufficiency. Even the simplest acts, sharing food, listening, offering time, become sacred. You no longer rush through them. You no longer treat life as a checklist of achievements. You begin to live like the earth breathes, quietly, rhythmically, in harmony with what is. That's what enough feels like. Not stillness without movement, but peace within motion. This peace, however, doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean you stop improving your life or working for a better world. It means you stop confusing effort with struggle. You can pursue excellence without anxiety. You can contribute to change without burning out. The mind that knows enough becomes sustainable, like a flame that burns steady rather than wild. There's another dimension to this, seeing how craving fuels worry. Every time you say, "What if I lose this?" or "What if I don't get that?" you're reinforcing a subtle fear of scarcity. Worry is craving's twin. One longs for what might come, the other fears what might go. Both keep you trapped in time. The only escape is presence, the moment where enough lives. Contentment is not laziness, it's clarity. It lets you see which desires are life-affirming and which are draining. You begin to distinguish between what nourishes the soul and what merely feeds the ego. The ego wants recognition, status, control. The heart wants connection, peace, expression. When you act from the heart, even ambition becomes a form of service. You start to understand that desire itself is not the problem. Ignorance of its source is. When you know why you desire something, you gain freedom. If your desire arises from joy, it expands you. If it arises from fear, it contracts you. Awareness is the turning point, the shift from craving to conscious creation. In daily life, this awareness looks simple. You pause before saying yes. You check if what you're chasing actually aligns with peace. You start to value depth over speed, quality over quantity, essence over appearance. You no longer seek experiences just to escape boredom. You begin to savor stillness as its own form of richness. Even consumption changes. You eat slower, not because it's trendy, but because you're truly tasting. You buy less, not out of moral pride, but because you no longer confuse accumulation with joy. You realize that enoughness feels better than excess. It's lighter, quieter, freer. This shift also heals the planet. The collective illusion of never enough drives exploitation and waste. When individuals rediscover sufficiency, society begins to realign. Greed turns into generosity, competition into cooperation. Buddhist economics isn't about poverty, it's about wisdom. An economy that values well-being over wealth, harmony over growth for growth's sake. The same principle applies internally. The economy of your mind is often in deficit. Too many thoughts, too little peace. But when you start practicing contentment, the mental traffic slows. You no longer chase every idea or replay every scenario. You start to see that peace isn't the absence of thought, but the quiet between them. In that quiet, clarity grows naturally. When you understand enough, every part of your life rebalances. You start sleeping better because your mind stops negotiating with the future. You spend time differently because you no longer measure value by productivity. You listen more because you no longer rush to respond. You smile easier because you're no longer waiting for a reason. The state of enoughness also strengthens resilience. When you're content within, external changes don't shake you as much. Losses still hurt, but they don't destroy your peace. You grieve, but you don't collapse. You know that life gives and takes, and both are part of the same breath. This stability is the foundation of emotional maturity, the ability to remain steady amid constant change. To practice this wisdom daily, bring awareness to the moments of just one more scroll, one more purchase, one more task before rest. Each one more is a small rebellion against contentment. Notice how it feels, the slight tension, the restless pull. Then gently say to yourself, this moment is enough. At first, it feels unfamiliar, maybe even uncomfortable, but with time, it becomes a refuge. You may still have goals, dreams, ambitions, but they no longer own you. You can pursue them with joy and release them with grace. Whether things go your way or not, your inner state remains grounded. That's what it means to have wealth that cannot be taken away, peace that doesn't depend on outcomes. In this quiet sufficiency, you begin to see how life itself provides what's needed. The mind that once obsessed over control starts to trust timing. The heart that once feared loss begins to appreciate impermanence. Desire no longer drives you, it dances with you. You move through life not as a beggar seeking completion, but as a creator expressing wholeness. And when you live this way, something extraordinary happens. Joy becomes simple again. You laugh more easily, rest more deeply, connect more authentically. You find beauty not because the world changed, but because you stopped demanding it to be different. That is the quiet wisdom of enough, not a static peace, but a living harmony where motion and stillness meet. When you rest in this awareness, worry has nowhere to grow. The anxious mind feeds on lack, but when you know you are enough, lack disappears. You no longer wake up chasing fulfillment. You wake up expressing it. That's the highest form of abundance, to move through the world light, open and satisfied, knowing that whatever comes or goes, the heart remains full. From this fullness, you begin to act differently. Every gesture becomes generous, every word carries ease, every silence feels complete. This is the true wealth that Buddhist wisdom points to. Not gold, not status, not possessions, but a mind that rests easily in itself. And when the mind rests, life unfolds naturally, gracefully, without struggle. That is the miracle hidden inside the word enough, not the end of desire, but the end of dissatisfaction. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of wholeness. A stillness that moves, a motion that rests. And from here, the next lesson begins. How to meet the peace that feels almost too still to trust, and how to stay awake when silence feels like emptiness. When you finally begin to rest in the quiet satisfaction of enough, a new kind of stillness begins to form inside you. Soft, spacious, weightless. It's the kind of peace you once thought you wanted, the silence that follows years of noise. Yet, when it arrives, something strange happens. Instead of comfort, you might feel unease. The silence feels too large, the calm almost hollow. After a lifetime of running, stopping feels unnatural. That quiet, the one you worked so hard to find, starts to feel like emptiness. This is one of the most misunderstood stages of awakening. Many people long for peace, but few are ready to live with it. The mind, conditioned by years of noise, interprets stillness as absence. It's like stepping out of a crowded marketplace into a vast, open desert. The sudden lack of sound feels like loss. You're not actually missing anything, you're simply not distracted anymore. But because you've equated noise with life, stillness feels like death. This reaction is deeply human. The mind has spent decades identifying with activity, thinking, solving, fixing, striving. When that movement quiets, the ego panics. It whispers, "Something's wrong. This can't be it." You start searching again, looking for something to fill the space, a new goal, a new problem, a new improvement. But this reflex to fill the void is exactly what keeps you from experiencing peace fully. The fear of emptiness arises because stillness exposes what we've been avoiding. Beneath the layers of doing, there's a naked awareness, vast and silent. Meeting it feels like standing face to face with yourself for the first time, without distraction, without story. The ego resists this encounter because it thrives on identity. It wants to be something, useful, productive, successful. But pure awareness is not something. It simply is. And that terrifies the conditioned mind, which survives by labeling, comparing, and controlling. Buddhist teachings describe this stage as the emptiness that reveals fullness. The paradox is that what feels like nothing is actually everything. But to reach that understanding, you must first pass through discomfort. It's not a flaw in your practice, it's the natural unraveling of habit. When you stop clinging to mental noise, the silence that remains can feel unbearable at first because it confronts you with raw existence. There's no entertainment, no distraction, no role to play, just being. In that first contact with stillness, many people retreat. They reach for their phone, for a conversation, for any form of stimulation. They say, "I can't meditate, it's too quiet," or "I need to be busy or I'll go crazy." But what they're really saying is, "I don't yet trust peace." The challenge isn't that peace is uncomfortable, it's that we're addicted to agitation. The mind would rather be in chaos than in calm, because chaos keeps it feeling alive, even if it's painful. This addiction to noise shows up in subtle ways. Even in moments of rest, you check for updates, replay old conversations, plan the next task. Silence threatens the identity you've built from constant engagement. You equate movement with purpose, so when there's nothing to do, you feel invisible. But that feeling of invisibility is not a loss. It's a doorway. It's life inviting you to step beyond your story into something boundless. In Buddhist psychology, this resistance is called dukkha of emptiness, the unease that comes from confronting impermanence without distraction. When the mind no longer finds security in external things, it looks inward. And what it meets first is space. That space feels empty only because you've been taught to find meaning in form. But awareness itself is not empty. It's luminous, alive, aware. The more you stay with it, the more you begin to sense that silence is not the absence of life, but its foundation. Learning to stay present with emptiness is like letting your eyes adjust to darkness. At first, everything looks blank. You feel lost, disoriented. But slowly, shapes begin to appear. You start to notice subtle details, the rhythm of your breath, the hum of your heartbeat, the pulse of life itself. The same happens in meditation and daily stillness. When the outer noise fades, inner clarity emerges. You start to see not only what's around you, but what's within you. This clarity can be unsettling because it reveals patterns that noise once concealed. You start noticing the restlessness underneath your actions, the craving behind your kindness, the subtle tension in your smile. Seeing these truths can hurt, but this discomfort is purification. The silence is not punishing you. It's showing you where you've been out of alignment. It's offering a mirror without distortion. In those moments, the most compassionate thing you can do is stay. Don't run back to distraction. Don't rush to fill the gap. Just breathe and let the discomfort exist. The mind may scream, "Do something," but your task is to do nothing, to rest in awareness itself. This is where real transformation happens, not through adding, but through allowing. When you stay long enough, something begins to shift. What once felt like emptiness starts to reveal texture, a quiet pulse of being, a subtle warmth. You realize you're not sitting in a void, but in the center of everything. This is what Zen masters call the fertile emptiness, a stillness so alive that it contains infinite potential. From this space, wisdom, creativity, and compassion arise naturally. The reason peace feels uncomfortable at first is that it dismantles identity. Every thought, every role, every story starts to dissolve, leaving you without a reference point. The mind panics because it can no longer define who you are. But the truth is, you were never the roles you played. You were always the awareness behind them. Letting those roles dissolve doesn't erase you, it reveals you. To understand this deeply, consider how silence relates to sound. Silence doesn't end when sound begins, and it doesn't disappear when sound stops. It's always present, the background that allows sound to exist. The same is true of awareness. Thoughts, emotions, experiences, they arise and fall like sounds, but awareness remains constant. When you rest in that awareness, peace no longer feels empty. It feels infinite. The path to comfort in peace is gradual. It's not about eliminating thought, but softening identification with it. You start to see thoughts as passing weather, not permanent truth. When anxiety arises, you don't chase it away, you observe it. When boredom appears, you don't react, you feel it fully. Each emotion becomes a visitor in the vastness of awareness. And the more you allow, the more you realize that nothing needs fixing. Everything is already part of the whole. The fear of emptiness is also rooted in the ego's fear of death. Stillness feels like dying because it dissolves the illusion of separateness. But it's not physical death. It's the death of illusion, the end of the false belief that you are your thoughts. Every time you rest in peace, a little piece of that illusion fades. This can feel like loss, but what you lose is suffering. One practical way to work with this is through micro moments of silence. Between two breaths, between two thoughts, between two words, pause. Don't fill the gap. feel it. At first, the gap feels awkward, like a glitch in the flow of life. But as you rest there more often, you realize that the gap is life. It's the space where everything arises and dissolves. Even daily activities can become gateways to this stillness. When you walk, feel your feet touch the ground without rushing to the next step. When you wash dishes, notice the sound of water, the texture of the plate, the rhythm of your movement. These simple moments become teachers of presence. The more you practice, the more natural stillness feels, not as an interruption, but as the undercurrent of everything. In the modern world, this kind of peace is rare because society celebrates stimulation. We are rewarded for speed, noise, and visibility. Silence is mistaken for weakness, rest for laziness, reflection for idleness. Yet the greatest clarity often arises from quiet observation. Many breakthroughs in art, science, or wisdom emerge not from constant thinking, but from moments of still awareness where the mind stops interfering and allows insight to surface. The key is to shift your relationship with emptiness from fear to curiosity. Instead of labeling it as void, start exploring it as space. Ask yourself, what is this stillness showing me? Often, it reveals truths you've been too busy to hear, buried emotions, forgotten dreams, intuitive knowing. The silence isn't empty, it's filled with the intelligence of life itself. As this relationship deepens, the discomfort fades. You start craving silence the way you once craved noise. It becomes nourishment. You realize that peace doesn't make you less engaged with life. It makes you more aware of it. You act more clearly, speak more truthfully, and love more purely because you're no longer reacting from chaos. The transition from restlessness to peace mirrors the journey from addiction to freedom. At first, the absence of your usual distractions feels unbearable, like withdrawal. But if you endure it, you begin to taste something purer than pleasure, contentment without conditions. This is the freedom the Buddha spoke of, not escape from life, but intimacy with it. Sometimes people ask, if I find peace, won't I lose my motivation? The answer is no. True peace doesn't remove drive, it refines it. You still act, but your actions come from clarity instead of compulsion. You still care, but your care is spacious, not suffocating. Peace doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. In this stillness, you begin to experience what Buddhist texts call sunyata, the emptiness that contains all forms. It's not nihilism, it's the recognition that everything is interconnected, arising and dissolving within awareness. You start to see how even your body, thoughts, and emotions are part of a larger dance of energy. You don't possess life, you participate in it. That realization dissolves the fear of emptiness because you see that emptiness is not nothingness, it's potential. Each time you rest in stillness, the fear diminishes. What once felt like void becomes comfort, like returning to the ocean after years on dry land. You start to prefer simplicity over complexity, silence over noise, being over doing. The world doesn't lose color, it gains depth. You start seeing beauty in pauses, meaning in quiet moments, connection in the space between words. Even your relationship with time changes. When the mind is noisy, time feels short, compressed, always running out. But in stillness, time expands. A single breath can feel eternal. You begin to live slower, not because you're lazy, but because you're fully present. You stop measuring moments by productivity and start experiencing them as complete in themselves. The fear of emptiness also dissolves when you realize that awareness has always been there, even in chaos. The same awareness that watches silence was watching noise. The content changes, but the watcher remains the same. This recognition gives you a sense of continuity, not as a person clinging to identity, but as consciousness itself, vast and steady. In this realization, peace becomes familiar. It stops feeling like a void and starts feeling like home. The mind no longer needs to fill every space with thought. You start valuing the gaps, the pauses between words, the quiet after laughter, the stillness before action. You see that these spaces are not interruptions, but essential parts of the symphony of life. Gradually, the distinction between noise and silence dissolves. You start to hear stillness even in movement, peace even in chaos. You realize that silence is not outside you, it's within you. It's not the absence of sound, but the awareness of it. That awareness travels with you everywhere. In conversations, in cities, in crowds. Once you find it, you never truly lose it. The discomfort that once kept you running becomes your greatest teacher. It shows you how to live without needing to escape. It teaches you that peace is not something fragile that can be lost, but a presence that can be recognized. When you stop fearing emptiness, you stop fearing yourself. And when you stop fearing yourself, you stop fearing life. From that space, worry dissolves naturally. The mind that was once frantic to control finally bows to the rhythm of existence. You stop filling the silence with thoughts, and instead let silence fill you. You realize that this so-called emptiness is the same ground from which love, joy, and wisdom arise. It was never empty. It was waiting. And as you settle into this realization, another understanding begins to surface. That peace is not fragile, but intelligent. It knows how to move, when to rest, when to act. It's not absence, but awareness in its purest form. And from this awareness, a deeper trust begins to grow. The trust that life itself has its own intelligence, one that does not require your constant interference. That is where the next truth unfolds. As the mind begins to rest in silence and the fear of emptiness fades, something profound begins to reveal itself, a quiet intelligence that seems to guide everything without effort. The wind moves without instruction. The heart beats without command. The body heals without your permission. Even when you do nothing, life continues to unfold. And this realization births one of the most powerful lessons on the spiritual path. Peace doesn't come from control, but from trust. This trust is not blind faith or passive surrender. It's a deep recognition that life knows how to take care of itself far better than the anxious mind ever could. In Buddhism and Taoist philosophy, this is known as Wu Wei, often translated as non-doing or effortless action. But it doesn't mean laziness or apathy. It means moving in harmony with the natural flow instead of struggling against it. It's not about giving up, it's about getting out of the way. The human tendency to interfere with life's flow begins with fear. The mind believes that if it doesn't manage, plan, and control every outcome, everything will collapse. This belief makes sense from the perspective of survival. Evolution wired us to anticipate threats, to manipulate circumstances, to control the external world for safety. But what once kept us alive now keeps us anxious. The same instinct that once protected us now makes us restless, constantly trying to improve or fix what isn't broken. The practice of non-interference asks for something radical: to trust the intelligence of existence itself. This intelligence is not mystical or abstract. It's visible everywhere. You can see it in how ecosystems balance themselves, how forests renew after fire, how wounds close without instruction. There's an order that doesn't require your input, and that same intelligence is within you. The same energy that grows your bones, digests your food, and breathes your lungs is guiding your life in ways your thinking mind cannot comprehend. But the conditioned ego doesn't trust this intelligence because it can't control it. It insists, "I must be in charge." The ego's motto is, "I know better." It wants to push, direct, and manage everything. When things go wrong, it blames itself. When things go right, it takes credit. But both reactions stem from the same illusion, that you are the one making life happen. In truth, you are part of life's movement, not its manager. You are a wave in the ocean, not the ocean itself. This misunderstanding creates suffering. Every time you resist what is, you create tension. Every time you insist that life should unfold differently, you cut yourself off from its wisdom. You become like someone trying to straighten a river with a stick, exhausting yourself in a fight against the current. The practice of non-interference is learning to float again. It's learning to let the river carry you while remaining fully awake to the direction it's taking. Trusting life's intelligence begins with observation. When you watch nature closely, you see that everything has its timing. Flowers bloom without calendars. Seasons change without permission. Nothing hurries, and yet everything is accomplished. The same law applies to human experience. Every emotion, every phase, every challenge arises when it's meant to. Trying to rush or resist it only creates friction. Non-interference means allowing things to unfold in their natural rhythm, knowing that timing is a form of wisdom too. One of the most subtle ways the mind interferes is through expectation. It demands that reality fit its design. This should have happened by now. That shouldn't have happened at all. Expectation is interference disguised as order. It assumes the mind knows better than the universe, but the universe operates through a larger intelligence, one that includes infinite variables, far beyond your mental reach. When you release expectation, you align yourself with that intelligence. You stop arguing with life and start collaborating with it. Non-interference doesn't mean passivity. It means intelligent participation. You still act, but your action arises from clarity, not compulsion. You move when movement feels natural, and rest when rest is called for. In this way, action and stillness become equally sacred. The distinction between doing and being begins to dissolve. Every act becomes a spontaneous response instead of a calculated reaction. This is what Zen calls effortless effort, when the doing flows from presence, not from struggle. To experience this, you have to listen deeply, not to thoughts, but to the quiet pulse beneath them. That still voice that whispers in intuition, that sense of rightness you can't explain. That is life's intelligence speaking through you. The more you listen, the more you realize that guidance is always available, but it's drowned out by noise. The constant analyzing, worrying, and second-guessing block the signal. Silence restores the connection. At first, this trust feels risky. The ego protests. If I stop interfering, things will fall apart. But the opposite happens. When you begin to step back, you see how much life organizes itself without your effort. Relationships evolve, opportunities appear, challenges resolve in ways you couldn't have planned. You realize that your interference was often the very thing delaying the natural flow. When you stop forcing outcomes, they begin to align on their own. The Buddha compared this to planting seeds. You prepare the soil, plant the seed and water it, but then you let the earth and sun do their work. Constantly digging up the seed to check its progress kills the growth. The same happens with your dreams, healing, and relationships. You do your part, then let go. Life's intelligence handles the rest. This is not resignation, it's wisdom, knowing the difference between effort and interference. A mind that interferes constantly is like a restless hand that won't stop touching a wound. It thinks it's helping, but it's preventing healing. Trust allows the wound to close naturally. This principle applies to emotional healing too. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to fix how you feel. Emotions have their own intelligence. When sadness arises, let it move through you. When anger surfaces, let it express in awareness. Don't suppress or dramatize it, just allow. In this way, even pain becomes part of life's balancing process. Non-interference is also the foundation of creativity. Artists, writers, musicians often describe moments when inspiration flows effortlessly, when it feels as though something greater is moving through them. That's Wu Wei. It's what happens when the mind stops micromanaging and allows the creative current to guide. The same can happen in conversation, in work, in love. When you stop controlling every detail, a higher intelligence begins to express itself through you. This flow is available to everyone, but it requires humility. You must accept that life knows what it's doing, even when you don't understand it. You don't need to see the entire map to trust the road. You don't need to control every turn to arrive at the right destination. Control is the mind's substitute for faith, but real faith is quieter. It doesn't beg, it listens. It doesn't demand, it observes. One way to cultivate this trust is to reflect on your own life. Think of moments when things seem to fall apart, only to later reveal a hidden order, a loss that led to growth, a delay that led to better timing, a failure that redirected you to something truer. At the time, you might have called it chaos, but from distance, it looks like design. Life was guiding you all along. You just couldn't see it from the middle of the story. When you begin to trust that intelligence, worry starts to lose its power. Worry is interference in mental form, the attempt to control the uncontrollable through thought. But thought cannot predict life. It can only react to it. The future is not a problem to be solved, but an unfolding to be witnessed. The more you interfere with it, the more anxious you become. The more you trust it, the more peaceful you feel. This doesn't mean you never plan or make decisions. Planning is useful when it arises from clarity, not fear. The difference is in your state of being. When your plan comes from worry, it carries tension. When it comes from trust, it carries ease. You act, but you don't cling. You prepare, but you don't obsess. The outcome matters, but it doesn't define your peace. Non-interference also changes how you relate to others. When you trust life's intelligence, you stop trying to manage people's journeys. You no longer feel responsible for everyone's happiness or growth. You can offer guidance, but you don't impose. You can love deeply, but you allow freedom. You start to see that each person's path unfolds according to their own timing. You can't rush their lessons or shield them from pain without interfering with their evolution. Compassion becomes wiser, less about fixing, more about trusting. The same principle applies to the collective. The world's chaos can easily tempt you into despair or over-control. But when you look closely, you see that even in crisis, balance is seeking to restore itself. Systems collapse so new ones can emerge. Darkness reveals what needs healing. The process may be painful, but it's intelligent. Your role is not to control the entire world, but to participate consciously in your corner of it. To act where your presence naturally flows, not from panic, but from purpose. There's a line in the Tao Te Ching that says, "The sage does nothing, yet nothing remains undone." This is the essence of Wu Wei. When your actions are aligned with life's flow, they carry exponential power because they're not fragmented by resistance. It's like sailing with the wind instead of against it. The effort feels light, but the movement is vast. Learning this art takes practice because the mind is addicted to interference. It constantly asks, "Am I doing enough? Should I be doing more? What if I lose control?" These thoughts arise from the ego's belief that peace must be earned through effort. But peace is the natural state when effort is balanced. Non-interference is not inaction, it's wise timing. It's the ability to feel when it's time to step forward and when it's time to step back. Meditation teaches this balance beautifully. When you sit quietly, thoughts will arise. The untrained mind tries to stop them. That's interference. The wise mind watches them without judgment. That's non-doing. The moment you stop trying to manipulate the mind, awareness expands. The breath flows naturally, the body relaxes, the heart opens. What unfolds is not forced peace, but remembered peace. You can bring this same awareness into daily life. When something goes wrong, instead of reacting instantly, pause. Let a moment of stillness intervene before action. That pause allows intelligence to move through you. Often, clarity arises not from doing more, but from doing less. The right response surfaces when you stop trying to invent it. This approach doesn't make you passive, it makes you effective. You start to notice how forcing things rarely works, while allowing creates harmony. Conversations go smoother when you stop trying to win. Work flows better when you stop pushing. Even the body heals faster when you stop resisting discomfort. Life unfolds more gracefully when you trust its rhythm. Non-interference also reveals a deeper truth about control, that it was never real to begin with. You never controlled outcomes, only your perception of them. Every time you thought you made something happen, countless unseen forces were at play. Timing, coincidence, other people's choices, universal laws. When you recognize this, control becomes unnecessary. You start to act not from domination, but from cooperation with life's movement. At the heart of this teaching lies humility. To trust life is to admit that you don't fully understand it. It's to accept mystery as a friend, not a threat. The mind craves certainty, but wisdom thrives in uncertainty. You don't need all the answers, you only need to stay open. The river doesn't know its path before it flows, yet it always reaches the sea. That's the nature of life's intelligence. It moves toward balance naturally. When you surrender to that flow, your sense of burden dissolves. You stop feeling like the doer and start feeling like the dancer, being moved by the music. The steps come effortlessly because you're no longer trying to control them. In that state, presence replaces pressure. You act with precision, but without tension. You give your best, but without fear. And here lies the paradox. When you stop forcing outcomes, you become more capable of shaping them. Because you're aligned with reality, not fighting against it. Your actions carry the power of truth, not the friction of resistance. This is mastery, not over life, but with life. As this understanding deepens, you start seeing everything differently, from relationships to ambitions, from challenges to pain. You realize that life's intelligence is always working toward balance, even when you can't see it. Trusting it doesn't mean ignoring responsibility. It means performing your role with awareness and grace, knowing the rest is not yours to control. Gradually, a calm confidence replaces anxiety. You stop needing constant reassurance because you feel the rhythm of life moving through you. You begin to sense that nothing is truly against you, that even difficulties are part of life's refinement process. The mind that once fought everything now bows in gratitude, seeing how every event serves a larger harmony. When this trust becomes natural, your life starts to flow with elegance. Decisions become clearer, interactions lighter, outcomes less personal. You begin to act like nature itself, spontaneous, intelligent, and kind. You find joy not in achievement, but in alignment. You no longer measure success by control, but by peace. And in that peace, you discover something extraordinary, that life has always been guiding you, through silence, through chaos, through every twist and turn. The intelligence you were trying to manage was never separate from you. It was the pulse of your own being, waiting for you to stop interfering long enough to hear it. When you trust that intelligence fully, even uncertainty becomes sacred. You no longer need guarantees because you sense the perfection in imperfection. You see that everything, every loss, every delay, every change, was never a mistake, but part of life's choreography. The dance continues, effortless and wise, and you, finally, know how to move with it. When you begin to live in rhythm with life's intelligence, something subtle but profound starts to happen. The mind grows quieter. The need to push fades. You stop wrestling with what is. But even in this peace, there remains one final trick of the mind, a faint echo of control, thought itself. Thoughts rise and fall like waves, carrying emotions, stories, and fears. They seem real, heavy, undeniable. Yet when you look closer, you see something astonishing. Thoughts have no weight. They are reflections, not reality. The mind is like a mirror. It doesn't create what appears in it. It reflects. When clouds pass across the sky, the mirror shows them. When the sky clears, the mirror remains unchanged. But most people mistake the reflection for the truth. A sad thought arises, and they believe they are sad. A fearful image appears, and they believe danger is near. They forget that thoughts are just ripples, temporary shapes on the surface of awareness. The Buddha called this illusion Maya, the tendency to mistake reflections for reality. This confusion is the root of worry. Worry is thought believed. It's the mind watching its own reflection and reacting as if it were something solid. A worried mind looks into the mirror of awareness and sees disaster, failure, loss. Then it panics, not realizing it's staring at its own projection. To free yourself from worry, you don't need to erase thoughts. You only need to see them as reflections. When you start observing the mind without identifying with it, a radical shift occurs. You realize there are two layers within you, the content of thought and the awareness that notices it. Awareness is like the mirror. Thought is the reflection. The mirror doesn't choose what appears, it simply allows. Clouds, sunlight, faces, all come and go, but the mirror remains untouched. That is your true nature, clear, open awareness that reflects everything but is stained by nothing. Most people, however, live trapped inside their reflections. They don't see thoughts as passing, they see them as truth. They say, "I am anxious," instead of "anxiety is present." This small difference in language points to an enormous difference in consciousness. One statement reinforces identity with thought, the other reveals awareness of it. When you stop saying, "I am my thoughts," and start saying, "I am aware of my thoughts," you begin to dissolve the illusion that keeps worry alive. Worry feeds on identification. The moment you believe a thought, you give it energy. You start to act as if it's real, and your body responds. Heart rate increases, breath shortens, muscles tense. The body doesn't know the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. It reacts to belief, not truth. This is why worry feels so physical. The body mirrors the mind. But when awareness steps in, the chain breaks. You can feel the tension and see it without adding story. The body begins to calm, and thought loses its hold. The practice of mirror awareness is not about suppressing thoughts, it's about watching them clearly. Meditation teaches this directly. When you sit quietly and observe, you begin to see thoughts arise like bubbles from the deep. They appear, linger, and dissolve. None of them stay. Even the most persistent thought fades when you stop feeding it. The more you observe, the more transparent they become. You start noticing their patterns, how certain emotions trigger them, how certain memories repeat them. The mind reveals its machinery, and once you see it, it loses its mystery. The mirror metaphor extends beyond meditation. In daily life, every reaction becomes an opportunity to practice awareness. Someone criticizes you, and the mind reflects hurt or anger. Instead of reacting, you pause and watch. This is hurt arising. The moment you label it without judgment, you separate awareness from content. You're no longer the reflection, You're the mirror. The emotion passes, but you remain clear. This is the beginning of freedom. Worry, by nature, thrives on resistance. The more you fight it, the more it grows. It's like struggling in quicksand. Every effort pulls you deeper. Mirror awareness offers another way. Instead of resisting, reflect. Let the thought appear. Let the feeling arise. Watch it as you would watch a bird cross the sky, present but passing. This act of seeing without grasping transforms worry from master to messenger. It shows you not what's wrong with life, but what the mind fears losing control over. This insight reveals an important truth. Thoughts don't have authority, they have momentum. A thought gains strength only through attention. When you repeatedly focus on a worry, it solidifies, gaining emotional gravity. But when you observe it without feeding it, it weakens. This is why mindfulness dissolves anxiety, not by solving problems, but by starving illusions. Awareness is like sunlight. When it shines on fear, the shadow disappears. You can experience this directly in small moments. When a worried thought arises, what if I fail? Pause. Feel the texture of that thought. Notice where it lands in your body. Perhaps your chest tightens or your stomach clenches. Now breathe and say silently, "This is just a thought." Watch it from a slight distance. In that instant, the thought loses some of its reality. It becomes one reflection among countless others. You've broken the trance. The mind's reflections are not enemies, they're signals. Each thought reveals something about the conditioning beneath it. Fearful thoughts show where trust is weak. Angry thoughts show where boundaries need clarity. Sad thoughts show where attachment still lingers. When you observe them as reflections, you can learn without drowning. You gain insight without suffering. This is the intelligence of awareness. It transforms reflection into wisdom. In Buddhism, this awareness is called sati, mindful presence. It's the ability to know what is happening while it happens, not to change it, not to analyze it, but simply to know. When mindfulness is strong, worry loses its power because it can no longer deceive you. The mind may still project fearful images, but awareness sees them as mirages. You start to smile at your own thoughts, the way you'd smile at a child playing pretend. One of the great misunderstandings of spiritual life is the belief that awakening means never having negative thoughts. In truth, awakening means you stop believing them. The mind continues its weather, clouds, storms, sunshine, but you no longer mistake weather for sky. You become the space that allows all patterns to move freely. This is the state of equanimity, not indifference, but vast acceptance. Seeing worry as reflection also changes your relationship with others. When someone triggers anxiety, instead of blaming them, you look inward. What part of me is being reflected here? Often, the world mirrors your inner state. The impatience you see in others may point to your own suppressed frustration. The judgment you perceive may reveal your own insecurity. Relationships become mirrors, showing what still needs to be seen. This understanding transforms conflict into practice. The beauty of this approach is that it removes blame from life. You stop seeing problems as enemies and start seeing them as reflections of consciousness. Everything becomes feedback. The difficult co-worker, the slow traffic, the unexpected loss. Each reflects something about attachment, patience, or expectation. Awareness turns every event into a teacher. Life stops being something that happens to you and becomes something that happens for your awakening. This doesn't mean you tolerate injustice or neglect responsibility. Mirror awareness is not passive acceptance, it's clear seeing. You act when necessary, but from understanding, not from reactivity. When you see clearly, your actions become more effective because they're not clouded by projection. You're responding to reality, not reacting to reflection. This clarity also reveals how most anxiety is anticipation, thoughts about what might happen. But the future is the mind's favorite mirror. It reflects not reality, but imagination. You can spend hours worrying about events that never occur. The mind plays both roles, the painter and the frightened observer of its own painting. Awareness breaks this loop by grounding you in the present. Here, in this breath, the future doesn't exist. The body is calm, the air is steady. Every moment you return to now, the mirror clears. In practice, this means cultivating awareness not just during meditation, but throughout the day. When you eat, know that you are eating. When you walk, know that you are walking. These small acts of knowing reconnect you to presence, where worry cannot survive. Anxiety needs time and projection to live. Presence gives it neither. Another insight emerges when you observe thoughts long enough. They repeat. The same worries, the same fears, the same inner dialogues circle endlessly. The mind is a recycler of content, not a creator of truth. It reuses patterns to maintain a sense of continuity. Once you see this, you stop taking thoughts personally. You understand that worry isn't evidence of reality, it's the echo of habit. Like an old song that plays long after you've stopped liking it, it lingers until you stop listening. The mirror mind doesn't reject thought, it simply reflects without distortion. That means allowing everything to appear, joy, sorrow, anger, hope, without preference. When the mirror has no bias, it reflects truthfully. Awareness without resistance shows reality as it is, impermanent, interdependent, ever-changing. From that vision arises wisdom, the understanding that worry is not a warning, but an invitation to look deeper. This perspective also frees you from guilt about thinking itself. Many people judge their minds harshly. I shouldn't think this way, or why am I still anxious? But judgment is just another reflection, another layer of thought mistaken for truth. When you stop fighting the mind, it begins to settle on its own. The mirror doesn't scold the reflections, it simply holds them. That gentle holding is healing. Over time, this awareness seeps into everything you do. You begin to notice thoughts as they form, catching them before they take over. You start seeing emotions as waves that rise and fall. You sense the spaciousness behind experience, an openness that can contain anything without being disturbed. This is the essence of liberation, not escaping the mind, but seeing through it. When you live this way, worry loses its meaning. You no longer see anxiety as proof of weakness or failure. You see it as movement within consciousness. Sometimes the reflection is calm water, sometimes it's stormy, but either way, the mirror remains untouched. You start to live with a quiet confidence, not because you've solved every problem, but because you trust the space in which problems appear. The mirror mind also brings humility. You realize that even wisdom is a reflection. Insights come and go like clouds revealing sunlight. You no longer cling to being right. You just stay aware. You stop needing to win arguments, prove points, or convince others. You speak with clarity, but without aggression. The peace that arises from this non-defensiveness is profound. It's the peace of no self, where identity gives way to presence. In that presence, even worry becomes a kind of teacher. Each anxious thought reminds you to return to awareness. Each fear points back to the mirror. Over time, the mind learns to relax in its own transparency. You realize that peace was never something to achieve. It was the nature of awareness all along. This doesn't mean life stops challenging you. The world still moves. Joys, losses, beginnings, endings. But your relationship with it changes. You stop drowning in reflections. You live in the awareness that reflects them. You laugh more easily, recover faster, and see more clearly. The mirror is not empty, it's luminous, and that luminosity is what you are. When the mind becomes this clear, you begin to sense the deeper purpose of awareness itself, not to escape life, but to illuminate it. You start to see how even worry, when observed with compassion, becomes wisdom in disguise. You no longer need to get rid of fear or sadness. You only need to see through them. They were never obstacles, only passing reflections on the mirror of consciousness. And as this understanding deepens, another layer of truth begins to reveal itself. That worry itself is part of a larger cycle, a loop the mind keeps replaying in its search for control and security. To see worry as reflection is to begin to break that loop. But to truly transcend it, you must understand the mechanism that keeps it spinning, the cycle of craving and aversion that Buddhism calls samsara. And that is where the next journey begins. When you begin to see thoughts as reflections, not reality, a remarkable stillness takes hold. Worry starts to dissolve because you recognize its nature, a passing movement on the surface of awareness. Yet even in this clarity, a quieter form of restlessness often remains, subtle and seductive. It doesn't look like fear or anxiety. It looks like hope. Hope seems pure, noble, even essential. It gives us something to hold on to when everything else feels uncertain. But beneath its glow hides a tension few notice, the soft, persistent unease of wanting the future to be different from the present. Hope, for most people, feels like light. It promises relief, better days, a reward for endurance. But the Buddha pointed to something radical, that hope, when unexamined, carries the same structure as fear. Both project into the future. Both say, what is not enough. Hope reaches forward. Fear recoils. They are two sides of the same coin, craving dressed in opposite emotions. Hope pulls you toward what you desire. Fear pushes you from what you resist. Both steal you from presence. This is not a rejection of hope itself, but an invitation to see it clearly. The kind of hope that liberates is different from the kind that binds. One arises from faith in life's unfolding, the other from dissatisfaction with the now. Most of us live entangled in the second type, the subtle suffering of anticipation. We tell ourselves, when I get there, I'll be free. When this happens, I'll finally rest. But there never arrives, because the mind keeps moving the goal. The chase continues, dressed as optimism, yet fueled by anxiety. This hidden anxiety within hope is easy to miss because it feels positive. It propels us to plan, to dream, to act. But underneath is a whisper, "Not yet." That whisper breeds restlessness. Even when things go well, the mind leaps to the next improvement. You finish one goal and instantly start another. You tell yourself it's ambition, but if you look closely, it's discomfort with stillness. A quiet inability to be content with now. The Buddha described this as bhava tanha, the craving for becoming. It's subtler than desire for pleasure or avoidance of pain. It's the endless drive to be more successful, more peaceful, more spiritual, more loved. The world praises this drive as progress, but spiritually, it's exhaustion disguised as purpose. It keeps you moving endlessly toward a horizon that recedes with every step. To see the suffering hidden in hope, you have to look at its texture. When you hope for something, your mind leaves the present moment. It begins constructing images of how things should be. A healed body, a perfect relationship, a better version of yourself. Those images feel uplifting, but they quietly divide you. One part of you lives in the imagined future, while another stays in the imperfect now. The distance between the two becomes tension. That tension is what you call motivation, but in truth, it's dissatisfaction with what is. This doesn't mean giving up all goals or dreams. It means learning to aspire without anxiety, to move toward growth without the weight of needing the future to save you. This is what Buddhist teachers call equanimous aspiration. You can still wish for healing, success, or peace, but you no longer stake your happiness on them. You act with intention, but without attachment. You plant seeds, but you let go of the harvest. Equanimous aspiration is different from passive acceptance. It doesn't say, do nothing. It says, do what is right, then rest in what unfolds. It's not the death of hope, it's the purification of it. The hope that binds says, I'll be happy when. The hope that frees says, I trust this moment as it is. One reaches forward with grasping, the other stands still in faith. This shift changes everything. When you stop needing the future to fix you, the present becomes enough. You can still dream and plan, but your peace no longer depends on outcome. Whether things go well or fall apart, your inner state remains steady. That's real power, the ability to act fully without losing your center. To reach this state, you have to examine the subtle ways hope disguises attachment. You may think you're pursuing joy, but often you're running from discomfort. You may say you're aiming for growth, but secretly you're avoiding failure. Hope becomes a mask that hides fear. It says, I'm striving for something beautiful, but beneath the beauty is the anxiety of not being enough as you are. Awareness of this pattern doesn't make hope disappear, it makes it transparent. You begin to use hope consciously rather than being used by it. This awareness also exposes the constant bargaining the mind does with life. It says, I'll accept this pain, but only if it leads to something better. Or, I'll be patient, but only if the reward is worth it. The ego turns even surrender into a transaction. But life doesn't negotiate. It unfolds according to its own wisdom. The moment you realize this, a strange peace appears, not because you got what you wanted, but because you no longer need to. This is where real freedom begins. Hope, when untangled from craving, becomes trust. You start to see that everything is already part of a greater balance. You don't need to force outcomes because they're already guided by an intelligence deeper than thought. You can still act, still create, still dream, but you do it from fullness, not lack. Your hope becomes gentle, spacious, like wind filling a sail, not fire burning the fuel of restlessness. To reach this place, you must face the discomfort of hope's collapse. When the mind realizes it cannot control the future, it trembles. That trembling feels like despair at first. You may feel lost, unanchored, purposeless. But beneath that loss is liberation, the freedom from needing guarantees. Hope collapses only to reveal trust, just as a wave falls back into the ocean it never left. This surrender to uncertainty doesn't make you passive, it makes you alive. When you no longer demand that life meet your expectations, every moment becomes new. You start noticing small details that once went unseen: the rhythm of breath, the play of light, the sound of rain. Presence becomes your security. You stop asking, "What's next?" and start realizing, this is it. Even in grief or pain, this awareness transforms experience. Instead of hoping pain will end, you start listening to what it teaches. You stay with it without trying to rush it away. Paradoxically, the pain begins to move faster when you stop pushing it. Life knows how to heal itself if you stop interfering. Hope says, "I'll feel better when this is over." Awareness says, "This too is part of life's intelligence." This understanding brings gentleness to ambition. You can still work for change, but the energy behind your work shifts. You're no longer fighting against reality, you're cooperating with it. You act from joy, not desperation. When success comes, you appreciate it without clinging. When it fades, you let it go without despair. You realize that your peace doesn't depend on the outcome, only on alignment with truth. The anxiety hidden in hope often shows up in spiritual practice as well. Many seekers turn meditation, prayer, or study into another form of striving. They hope to achieve enlightenment, to finally find peace. But this very effort becomes a barrier. You can't chase stillness with a mind that's running. Awakening isn't a destination, it's the dropping of the search. It reveals itself when the mind stops demanding something more. In this way, spiritual hope becomes the final illusion to dissolve. You don't awaken because you've earned it. You awaken because you stop pretending you were ever asleep. The light of awareness was always present. Hope only delayed the recognition by projecting it into the future. When the seeker disappears, the sought is found, not as an event, but as a timeless truth. Seeing through hope also brings compassion for others. You start noticing how much suffering comes from chasing fulfillment, the endless race for achievement, approval, or meaning. People are not greedy or shallow, they're just scared. They're trying to fill a sense of incompleteness that hope keeps alive. When you see this clearly, you stop judging. You understand that everyone, including you, is learning to rest in what already is. Compassion replaces criticism. Patience replaces urgency. In daily life, this awareness shows up as small shifts. When you catch yourself saying, "I hope this goes well," you pause and add, "and if it doesn't, that's okay too." This simple addition breaks the chain of attachment. It turns hope into openness. You're still wishing for the best, but you're no longer afraid of the rest. This mindset frees enormous energy. What was once spent on worry now fuels creativity, humor, and clarity. Equanimous aspiration doesn't mean indifference. You still care deeply for your loved ones, your goals, your growth. But your care is steady, not frantic. You can give your best effort and still rest peacefully at night. You can love fully and still accept loss. This is not detachment, it's maturity. It's love without demand, effort without exhaustion. At the core of this transformation is trust. Trust not in circumstances, but in awareness itself. The same intelligence that regulates your heartbeat and turns seed into tree is guiding your path. When you align with that flow, you no longer need to chase outcomes. You move with life instead of ahead of it. Your hope transforms from longing into participation. You stop waiting for happiness to arrive and start expressing it through every action. This state of trust is not something you reach once and keep forever. It's a living practice. The mind will still reach for hope. That's its habit. But each time you notice, you gently return to presence. You remind yourself, "I don't need the future to be complete. I am complete now." Slowly, hope becomes lighter, not an escape from the present, but a natural movement within it. To sustain this awareness, reflection is essential. At the end of each day, ask yourself, what was I hoping for today? What discomfort was I trying to avoid? This isn't self-criticism, it's curiosity. The answers reveal where attachment still hides. With each insight, you loosen the knot a little more. Over time, you start to live with less tension, less striving, less inner noise. When the anxiety of hope fades, gratitude naturally arises. You no longer look to the future for salvation. You find blessings where you stand. Ordinary moments become luminous. The sound of your breath, the warmth of tea, the touch of sunlight. You see that life has always been enough. You were simply too focused on tomorrow to notice. Gratitude becomes your default state, not as forced positivity, but as recognition of abundance that was always here. Even in uncertainty, this gratitude endures. The unknown no longer feels threatening because you see it as spacious. It holds infinite possibilities, not dangers. Hope once made you chase one possible future. Awareness lets you receive them all. Life stops being a path to somewhere else and becomes a dance unfolding step by step, perfectly incomplete. This realization is not the end of movement. It's the beginning of true flow. When you act without clinging, every gesture carries peace. When you plan without anxiety, every goal feels lighter. You stop measuring progress by distance from your dreams and start measuring it by depth of presence. The more you live this way, the more you discover a peace that doesn't depend on anything. Not success, not love, not even hope. In this space, life becomes simpler, not smaller. You can still dream, but your dreams don't imprison you. You can still aim high, but you're not afraid of falling. You move with purpose, not pressure. And because you're no longer running from now, every step feels alive. The greatest paradox is that when you stop clinging to hope, joy becomes effortless. You laugh more easily, forgive faster, rest deeper. Life doesn't need to fulfill your expectations anymore. It becomes fulfilling by itself. You realize that what you once called hope was a misunderstanding, mistaking the desire for peace as something to be achieved when it was simply waiting to be noticed. As this understanding ripens, you begin to sense something profound, that the cycle of craving and anticipation, of fear and hope, is the very heartbeat of samsara itself. To break free from this cycle, one must see how it repeats, how each hope births fear, and each fear fuels more desire. The next step is to uncover how this endless loop keeps the mind circling the same patterns of suffering, the worry habit itself taking shape as a modern form of samsara. When the mind begins to see through the cycle of hope and craving, the constant reaching forward slows. You no longer lean so heavily into the future, and the endless tension that once filled your chest begins to dissolve. Yet, as that stillness deepens, another discovery unfolds. There is a weight you've carried all along, hidden not in the future, but in the sense of self itself. The ego, subtle and persistent, survives every insight by finding new ways to assert its presence. It wants to own peace, to claim understanding, to preserve its shape. The path ahead isn't about fighting the ego, but learning to let it fade in small, ordinary ways, until what remains is simple awareness, unburdened and alive. Ego death sounds final and grand, yet in truth it happens in the smallest gestures, the quiet surrender of an argument, the choice to listen instead of correct, the willingness to release the need for praise. Each time you let go of being the center, something in you softens, a contraction loosens, a false certainty dies. These tiny dissolutions may sting for a second, but they leave behind a lightness, a kind of relief that no victory ever gives. It's the relief of no longer having to hold up the world. The ego thrives on tension. It feeds on opinion, judgment, and control. Every time you insist on being right, every time you defend a position, the ego grows denser. It wants to stand out, to be special, to assert its importance. But the more it insists, the more you separate yourself from life. You become an isolated fragment rather than part of the whole. Letting that identity soften is not loss, it's returning to flow. You begin to sense that peace doesn't come from winning the story, but from releasing it. These small releases are not philosophical, they are embodied. You feel them. A tightening in the chest when you're misunderstood, a rush of irritation when someone interrupts, a flash of pride when you're praised. These are moments when the ego appears in real time, asking to be noticed. Awareness of that movement is already the beginning of its dissolution. You don't need to fight the feeling or replace it with something better. You only need to see it clearly. Awareness exposes illusion, and what's exposed cannot stay solid for long. When you start watching closely, you realize the ego dies dozens of times a day. It dies when you laugh at yourself, when you forgive, when you choose silence over defense. It dies when you allow someone else's truth to exist beside your own. None of these are dramatic acts, yet together they carve deep channels of freedom. The ego's grip weakens not through force, but through gentle repetition. Each letting go opens a little more space for awareness to shine through. This dying is not a punishment, but a return to simplicity. The person you think you are, your name, your history, your opinions, is only one thin layer of what's real. Beneath it lies something vast and unshaken, the awareness that watches without needing to claim. Each time you stop clinging to identity, that deeper awareness becomes clearer. It doesn't announce itself, it simply appears when you stop covering it. The small deaths happen even in love. The ego wants to own affection, to define it, to make it reciprocal. But when you allow love to flow without conditions, the self that demands attention quietly dissolves. Love, in its purest form, has no center. It's a movement of life through you, not something you perform. Each time you stop needing to be loved in a specific way, a part of the old self disappears, and what remains is openness. Even beauty can teach you to die this way. When you're moved by music or by light on water, the boundaries of me fade for a moment. The world becomes whole again. You forget your role, your story, your opinions. You're just there, pure experiencing, no separation. The ego returns soon after, trying to name the moment or keep it. But if you don't follow that impulse, you rest again in the same spaciousness. These are the joyful deaths, the dissolving that feels like expansion rather than loss. At first, this practice feels fragile. The ego's need for definition runs deep. It doesn't disappear overnight. It slowly loses its authority. You'll still find yourself arguing, judging, defending. That's not failure. It's another chance to see. Every contraction reveals a doorway back to awareness. The key is to pause before the story grows. Feel the resistance rise and watch what happens when you don't feed it. You'll notice how quickly emotion changes shape when it's not held by narrative. Anger softens, pride quiets, fear subsides. The self reforms more gently, less tightly bound. Daily life becomes the perfect training ground for this practice. When you're waiting in line, notice impatience. That's the ego insisting time owes you comfort. When someone disagrees with you, feel the urge to explain. That's the ego seeking validation. When plans change unexpectedly, observe the resistance. That's the ego fearing loss of control. Each moment of irritation or defense is an invitation to practice dying a little. Not by force, but through recognition. The ego dies whenever you let something be as it is. To allow life its own rhythm is to step out of the center. When things don't unfold as you want, notice how quickly the mind constructs blame or comparison. It says, "This shouldn't be happening." But awareness sees that thought as another reflection passing through. When you stop identifying with it, you return to the stillness beneath the noise. This quiet letting be is one of the highest forms of surrender. Ego death is also present in forgiveness. To forgive is to release the self that clings to hurt. The ego keeps wounds alive because they give it shape. I was wronged. I am righteous. When you let the story drop, a part of you vanishes with it. Yet what remains is lighter. Forgiveness is not an act of virtue, but of liberation. It's one of the most powerful small deaths you can experience because it dissolves layers of identity built from pain. The same happens with humility. When you admit not knowing, The self that depends on being right disappears. You step into open awareness, where curiosity replaces certainty. The ego thrives on opinions. Humility starves it. This openness allows understanding to grow naturally, without the strain of defending a position. It's not weakness. It's strength without aggression. As you practice, even failure becomes sacred. When plans crumble or pride is bruised, the ego faces its own mortality. It panics, but beneath that panic is opportunity. You can let the collapse reveal the vastness that remains untouched. The mind says, "I've lost." Awareness knows nothing was ever yours to lose. That recognition turns pain into insight. The self that emerges after such moments is quieter, wiser, less afraid of falling again. These micro-deaths also occur through simplicity. The more you simplify, the fewer structures the ego can hide behind. Complexity is often its armor, layers of activity, distraction, and identity. Simplicity removes the armor and exposes the raw truth of being. You begin to live more directly, speaking less, listening more, acting from clarity instead of compulsion. The absence of clutter, inner or outer, feels like breathing freely for the first time. In this process, resistance will arise as fatigue, boredom, or even pride in doing well. The ego can disguise itself as spirituality. I am someone who has transcended ego. Recognizing that thought as another mask is yet another death. Awareness keeps you honest. The moment you claim progress, pause. The one who claims is the one being undone. Every small death brings gratitude. You start noticing how much energy is released when you stop fighting to be someone. The body relaxes, the breath deepens, the constant background tension of self-concern fades. Life feels simpler, not because circumstances changed, but because the constant commentary has quieted. The silence that follows each release is more satisfying than any victory the ego could win. This silence is not empty. It's alive. It holds compassion, humor, and patience. You start to laugh more easily at the mind's dramas. The same patterns that once caused suffering now appear almost theatrical. You see how the ego tries to reclaim center stage, and you let it, knowing it will pass. Nothing needs to be fixed. Awareness itself is the correction. The joy in these small deaths grows because each one reveals something indestructible. You realize that what you truly are doesn't die when identity fades. It becomes clearer. Each letting go strips away a layer of noise, leaving behind what has always been steady, awareness itself. The fear of disappearing dissolves when you see that presence cannot vanish. What dies is illusion. What remains is truth. In time, the distinction between dying and living loses meaning. You no longer experience letting go as loss, but as renewal. Each release refreshes perception. Each surrender restores connection. Life becomes an unfolding rhythm of holding and releasing, like breathing. The inhale of individuality, the exhale of unity. Both necessary, both sacred. This rhythm weaves itself into every interaction. When you speak, you notice the pull to persuade and soften it. When you listen, You feel the urge to prepare a reply and release it. When you love, you sense attachment rising and let it loosen. You begin to move through the world quietly aware that freedom isn't in gaining more, but in letting small parts of me fall away one by one. In this ongoing dissolving, even effort starts to feel lighter. You don't have to perform spirituality or prove humility. Awareness itself guides the process naturally. You notice, release, return. The ego dies, and in its place, a calm vitality takes root. Not the energy of striving, but of being. Life continues to move, but you are no longer its anxious manager. You are its participant, open, alert, and at ease. As the ego begins to dissolve through small daily deaths, life becomes lighter. The walls of self-importance start to thin, and awareness moves more freely through everything you do. But with this new spaciousness comes a subtle challenge: how to stay engaged with life without falling back into control. How to care deeply without grasping. How to help, love, protect, and guide without turning those impulses into ownership or anxiety. This delicate equilibrium is the middle way between caring and control. It's easy to confuse compassion with responsibility. The heart feels another's suffering and instantly wants to relieve it, to fix it, to make it disappear. That impulse comes from kindness, but it often hides a layer of fear. Fear of powerlessness, fear of watching someone hurt, fear that if we don't act, we're failing them. The difference between caring and control is invisible to the untrained mind, yet it defines the boundary between love that liberates and love that imprisons. The Buddha's teaching on the middle way was not limited to philosophy. It's a living wisdom for moments like these. It teaches balance, not the cold detachment of indifference, nor the fiery grip of obsession. It's a quiet intelligence that knows when to step forward and when to step back. True compassion doesn't interfere. It participates. It joins life's flow instead of trying to redirect it. This balance begins with understanding that caring doesn't mean controlling outcomes. To care is to be fully present with another's experience without trying to rewrite it. It's to meet suffering with presence, not panic. When someone you love struggles, you don't have to rush in to fix their pain. You can hold space for it, a space that allows their process to unfold naturally. That kind of care is more powerful than any solution because it honors the intelligence of the other person's journey. Control, on the other hand, arises when fear disguises itself as love. It says, "I just want what's best for you." But beneath that statement is an unspoken belief: I know better than life. It's the same ego we've been dissolving, now reappearing in a more virtuous costume. Control doesn't trust the timing of growth. It tries to accelerate it. It doesn't trust pain to teach. It tries to erase it. And in doing so, it robs others and ourselves of their natural unfolding. True caring accepts imperfection as part of wisdom. It doesn't demand that life conform to its schedule. When a friend suffers, the caring heart can sit quietly beside them, offering warmth without words. When a child makes mistakes, caring lets them learn through experience, even when it hurts to watch. When a plan falls apart, caring accepts it as part of life's pattern, not a failure to manage properly. This is compassion that breathes instead of tightens, love that trusts instead of fears. The balance between caring and control is tested most in relationships. You want the people you love to be safe, to choose wisely, to avoid pain, but their life belongs to them, not to your expectations. When you interfere with their path, even with good intentions, you unconsciously send a message: I don't believe you can handle this. The deeper truth of love is faith. Faith that the same intelligence guiding your growth guides theirs too. This understanding transforms how you help others. Instead of rescuing, you begin to support. Instead of directing, you begin to empower. You stop trying to carry people across the river and start trusting that they can swim, even if they struggle. Compassion gives you presence. Control gives you tension. The two feel completely different in the body. Compassion feels open, like breathing fully. Control feels contracted, like holding your breath. You can feel the difference immediately when you slow down enough to notice. The same principle applies to how you treat yourself. Inner control masquerades as discipline, self-improvement, even spirituality. You push yourself to grow faster, meditate better, understand more. But real growth is organic, not mechanical. The middle way honors effort, but frees it from compulsion. You practice with sincerity, then release the outcome. This is how discipline becomes devotion instead of demand. In Buddhist psychology, this balance is often expressed through the concept of upekkha, equanimity. Equanimity is not indifference. It's steady love that neither clings nor rejects. It allows joy and sorrow, success and failure, closeness and distance, without collapsing into either extreme. It's the mind's natural posture when it's rooted in awareness instead of fear. The equanimous heart says, I care, but I don't control. That statement isn't detachment. It's the highest form of trust. Practicing this balance begins with attention to your motivations. Before acting, pause and ask, am I moving from love or from fear? Love acts because it wants to connect. Fear acts because it wants to control. Love trusts process. Fear demands results. When your motivation is clear, your actions naturally align with balance. The pause itself is part of the practice. It interrupts the reflex of interference and lets awareness choose the next step consciously. One of the simplest ways to practice this is through listening. Real listening is active non-interference. It's staying present without inserting your opinions or fixes. When you truly listen, you create space for others to hear themselves. Silence becomes medicine. You don't have to solve their problem. Your calm presence becomes the solution. That's the power of caring without control. It allows transformation to arise from within the other person, not from your effort. This balance also applies to the world around you. When you look at society's pain, injustice, conflict, suffering, the heart naturally wants to act. But the way you act matters. Action born from anger may burn bright but fades quickly. Action born from clarity sustains itself. You can work for change without being consumed by rage or despair. The middle way doesn't ask you to be neutral. It asks you to be grounded. It allows compassion to flow into effective, wise action rather than impulsive reaction. This grounded compassion is what the Buddhists call right effort. It's effort guided by wisdom, not by ego. It knows when to rest and when to move, when to speak and when silence carries more power. Right effort is caring expressed through presence rather than control. It's the difference between pushing and allowing, between forcing and flowing. Learning this balance often requires unlearning emotional habits. Many people were raised to equate love with worry, to believe that constant anxiety for others is proof of care. But worry doesn't protect anyone. It only drains energy. Worry says, I must hold everything together. Compassion says, everything belongs to the flow of life. When you shift from worry to compassion, your energy becomes healing instead of heavy. You start supporting others without carrying them. The same principle applies to leadership, parenting, and community work. Whether you're guiding a team, raising a child, or helping a friend, control limits what others can become. When you allow space, you create trust. You let people learn through their own choices. You remain present without dominating. The result is growth, not forced, but natural. This art of balanced caring also heals burnout. Constant fixing and managing exhaust the nervous system. You give and give until your empathy turns to depletion. But when you practice caring without control, you draw from a deeper well. You no longer rely on personal willpower alone. You align with the flow of life itself. Giving becomes replenishing because it no longer drains you. You offer energy, but it passes through you rather than being taken from you. To embody this, notice when your care starts to turn into tension. Maybe you're helping someone and suddenly feel frustrated that they don't change fast enough. That's the moment the ego takes over, turning compassion into control. Pause there. Feel the contraction. Then breathe into it and release. Remind yourself, my role is to support, not to steer. That breath resets the balance. It brings the mind back to presence instead of projection. Even in spiritual practice, this balance is essential. You can care about awakening so much that it becomes another form of control, an obsession with results, an identity built around being spiritual. True practice drops this fixation. It allows insight to ripen naturally. You show up to each moment, do what needs to be done, and trust that growth happens on its own timeline. Effort remains, but it's clean, unforced. This same wisdom applies to how you relate to emotions. Many people try to control their feelings, labeling some as good and others as bad. But emotions are waves. They move and change when allowed to. Trying to suppress sadness or force joy only creates inner conflict. The middle way is to feel everything fully without becoming lost in it. You can let sadness be sadness, anger be anger, joy be joy, and still remain anchored in awareness. Emotional intelligence grows from this gentle acceptance. Over time, the distinction between caring and control becomes intuitive. You start to feel the difference in your body. When you're aligned with care, there's spaciousness and calm. When you slip into control, there's tightness, impatience, and fatigue. The body becomes a compass for the soul's balance. Listening to it prevents you from drifting into extremes. This understanding also transforms forgiveness. Control wants to dictate how others should behave, even in hindsight. It clings to resentment as a form of moral superiority. But caring without control allows release. It says, "I wish you well, even if you never see what I see." That's not weakness, it's freedom. You free yourself from the burden of changing others and return to peace. The same principle extends to the natural world. Humanity's collective anxiety about the planet often manifests as control, forcing solutions without understanding interdependence. True ecological awareness mirrors spiritual awareness, a recognition that life regulates itself when harmony is restored. We act wisely not by dominating nature, but by cooperating with its intelligence. This is compassion applied to the earth, engaged but not controlling. On a deeper level, this middle way reflects how awareness itself functions. Awareness doesn't manipulate what it perceives. It doesn't judge, fix, or resist. It allows all experience, pleasant and painful, joyful and difficult, to appear and pass. That's why awareness feels so peaceful. It cares without controlling. When your mind starts to mirror that quality, you live with the same grace. Life continues to move, but you're no longer caught in every motion. Living this way doesn't make you passive, it makes you wise. You act where action is natural, not where anxiety demands it. You speak when words bring clarity, not when silence would heal more. You stop confusing busyness with effectiveness and start seeing that calm presence often does more than frantic effort ever could. In this balance, compassion matures. It becomes vast but grounded, an open heart guided by a steady mind. You can hold someone's pain without drowning in it. You can give help without needing gratitude. You can lead without domination and follow without submission. Every act of care becomes lighter, freer, more truthful. The middle way between caring and control is not a line to walk once, but a living rhythm that must be felt in each moment. Some days it leans toward action, others toward stillness. Some moments call for intervention, others for patience. The wisdom lies in sensing which is which. The more you trust awareness, the more that sensing becomes natural. It's not calculation, it's attunement. Through this attunement, life becomes a dialogue rather than a monologue. You're no longer trying to impose your will, you're listening to the current of existence and responding in harmony. You care deeply, yet your care doesn't suffocate. You love fully, yet your love doesn't bind. You give completely, yet your giving leaves you whole. This is compassion in balance, the effortless grace of being present without control, where love breathes freely and peace sustains itself. When caring becomes free from control, the heart settles into a rare kind of quiet. You start to feel the ease that comes from acting without attachment, helping without exhaustion, and loving without fear. Yet, even as balance deepens, something persistent lingers in the background, the hum of habitual thinking, the pull of anxiety that returns no matter how many insights you've had. You wake with a calm mind, but by afternoon, the same loops begin, replaying, predicting, worrying. It's as if the mind keeps rebuilding the same maze, even after you've learned the way out. This is not failure, it's samsara in psychological form, the worry habit loop that keeps humanity circling the same patterns of suffering. Samsara, in Buddhist understanding, is not a distant metaphysical idea. It's the everyday cycle of craving and aversion, the endless spinning of the mind between wanting and resisting, chasing and fleeing. Modern anxiety is the same cycle wearing a new mask. It's the constant turning of thought, fueled by desire for safety and resistance to uncertainty. The mind says, "If I think long enough, I can fix this," not realizing that the very act of overthinking sustains the suffering it's trying to escape. To see this clearly, look closely at how worry functions. It always begins with a trigger, a thought, a memory, a sensation. The mind labels it as a problem and starts working. It analyzes, forecasts, calculates. This gives a temporary illusion of control, a momentary comfort. But the more the mind tries to solve, the more uncertain it becomes. Every answer opens another question. Every scenario spawns new fears. The process feeds on itself until the body reacts as though the imagined danger were real. Heart racing, breath shortening, the loop tightens. What began as thought becomes a full-body experience. The Buddha described this mechanism in ancient terms, craving and aversion. Craving arises as the desire for something to be different, to gain, to fix, to escape. Aversion arises as the rejection of what is, to push away pain, uncertainty, loss. Together, they spin the wheel of samsara, the repetitive motion of suffering. In modern language, it's the loop of anxiety, wanting things to be safe, predictable, perfect, while fearing everything that threatens that illusion. The mind chases comfort and flees discomfort, never resting long enough to experience peace. Breaking this cycle requires seeing how each link connects. Worry doesn't come from circumstance, it comes from interpretation. The world presents neutral events, a sound, an email, a glance, and the mind instantly weaves stories. This means something bad. I can't handle that. What if it gets worse? Each story triggers emotion, and the emotion reinforces the story. This is how samsara operates within thought. Perception, feeding reaction, reaction feeding perception. Without awareness, the loop becomes self-sustaining. The modern world amplifies this ancient loop through constant stimulation. Information overload keeps the nervous system in a state of mild alarm. News cycles, social media, notifications, each one triggers craving and aversion 100 times a day. We crave validation, fear rejection. We crave success, fear failure. Technology doesn't create samsara, it accelerates it. The mind, already conditioned to spin, now spins faster. Understanding the loop intellectually is not enough. The mind can know it's trapped and still keep spinning. Real transformation happens when awareness enters the process, not as analysis, but as observation. When you see the cycle in real time, it begins to slow. You notice the first spark. A thought arises, a contraction in the body, the impulse to fix. Awareness doesn't stop the thought, it reveals it. In that revelation, a choice appears, to follow the pattern or to remain still. That pause is the first break in the wheel. In Buddhist psychology, this awareness corresponds to sati, mindfulness. It's the space between stimulus and reaction, the gap where freedom hides. Most people move so quickly from thought to reaction that the gap is invisible. But with practice, you begin to sense it. The moment before the worry takes hold, the split second before you interpret sensation as threat. Catching that moment changes everything. It's not control, it's clarity. You don't suppress the worry, you watch it arise and fade. The loop of anxiety survives on one ingredient: belief. A thought becomes suffering only when believed. What if I lose my job is harmless as sound, but when you believe it, the body reacts. The muscles tense, the heart speeds up, the mind races. Belief is the glue of samsara. When awareness sees the thought as thought, the glue dissolves. The mind can still think, but the heart no longer contracts. This practice reveals how much of our distress is self-created. The outer world rarely changes as fast as the inner one does. A single email can send the mind spinning for hours, creating scenarios that never occur. The suffering feels real because the body experiences the emotion as if the event already happened. This is psychological samsara. Rebirth after rebirth inside thought. You die into one story only to wake in another, endlessly. To escape this cycle, you don't need to eliminate thoughts. You need to stop being reborn in each one. Every time a thought arises and you identify with it, this is me, this is my problem, you're reborn into another life of suffering, another round of worry. But when you see the thought and remain the observer, you stay unbound. Thoughts continue, but you're no longer inside them. You've stepped off the wheel. Breaking the worry loop also means changing your relationship with discomfort. Worry is avoidance disguised as care. It's the mind's way of not feeling uncertainty. Instead of sitting in unease, it runs simulations of possible outcomes. But unease is not the enemy, it's the teacher. When you stay present with discomfort, it loses its power. The body adjusts, the nervous system recalibrates. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. This is how resilience is born, not through control, but through capacity. Craving and aversion both arise from misunderstanding, impermanence. The mind assumes that feelings are fixed, that fear will last forever, that pain will overwhelm us. But every emotion, no matter how strong, changes when allowed to move. Fear peaks, plateaus, and fades. Sadness rises and softens. The loop of suffering continues only because the mind interrupts this natural flow. It resists or clings. Awareness restores motion. By letting emotions complete their course, you allow samsara to dissolve within the moment. Modern psychology echoes this truth through concepts like exposure and acceptance. Avoidance strengthens fear, presence dissolves it. Every time you allow yourself to experience a difficult emotion without reacting, you weaken the link of aversion. Each moment of surrender breaks one spoke of the wheel. Over time, you realize that fear was never the enemy. Resistance was. Another link in the worry habit is identification with the thinker. The mind produces thought automatically, but the ego claims ownership. I am thinking. This identification fuels endless self-critique. Why do I worry so much? What's wrong with me? But thought is not a personal flaw, it's a function of the mind. The mind thinks like the heart beats. Recognizing this depersonalizes the loop. Instead of my worry, it becomes worry is happening. This shift from possession to observation disarms the loop's emotional charge. It's important to understand that samsara doesn't end because life becomes perfect. It ends because you stop reacting to imperfection as if it were abnormal. When difficulties arise, the ego says, "This shouldn't be happening." Awareness says, "This too belongs." Acceptance doesn't mean liking pain, it means recognizing it as part of the flow. When nothing is rejected, the cycle has no momentum. Craving and aversion cannot survive in wholeness. Breaking the worry loop requires patience because the mind is ancient. Its patterns were formed over millennia of survival. You can't simply command it to stop spinning. The practice is gentler, catching, observing, releasing. Each time you complete this cycle consciously, the nervous system rewires slightly. The mind learns that it can face uncertainty without collapsing. This rewiring is modern neuroscience confirming ancient Dharma. Awareness changes the brain's habitual pathways, loosening the grip of fear. Another way to dissolve the loop is through compassion. The warrior within you is not malicious, it's frightened. It believes its vigilance keeps you safe. Fighting it only strengthens it. Instead, meet it with kindness. When the mind begins to spiral, say softly, "Thank you for trying to protect me." This small act of acknowledgement calms the inner alarm. Compassion interrupts the loop not by force, but by soothing the part of you that's scared to stop worrying. This understanding extends to how you perceive others caught in their own loops. When you see someone consumed by anxiety, you stop judging and start understanding. You recognize samsara in motion, craving for relief, aversion to uncertainty, belief in control. You can support them not by trying to fix their thoughts, but by offering calm presence. Awareness is contagious. Your stillness reminds others of their own capacity for stillness. Over time, awareness exposes even the subtlest forms of craving, the craving for peace itself. The mind can turn liberation into another goal. If I meditate enough, I'll be free. But freedom doesn't come from trying to escape samsara. It comes from seeing it clearly. When you no longer resist the loop, it stops being a prison and becomes a rhythm, movement within stillness. You realize that the wheel was never separate from awareness. It was awareness spinning in disguise. This recognition transforms how you relate to thought itself. You stop fearing the return of worry. Thoughts still come, but they no longer threaten you. You meet them as passing weather, real enough to feel, but not to believe. The mind's storms lose their violence when you know you are the sky. That knowing doesn't erase difficulty, but it removes despair. Samsara continues for others, but for you it's seen for what it is, a play of causes and conditions, not a personal curse. This clarity also deepens compassion for the collective mind. The whole world runs on these loops. Nations craving security, individuals chasing validation, societies avoiding pain. Every conflict, addiction, and obsession is a reflection of samsara repeating itself. To see this without cynicism is wisdom. It means you can engage with the world's problems from peace rather than panic. You work for change, but you don't feed the cycle. You help without hatred, act without illusion. Awareness of the worry loop also redefines success. The ego measures progress by outcomes, no more anxiety, no more fear. But wisdom measures it differently, by how quickly you notice the loop and return to presence. Perfection isn't the end of worry, it's the end of identification with it. Each return is a small awakening. Each glimpse of awareness breaks the wheel a little more. This practice isn't about escaping life, it's about inhabiting it fully. The mind still plans, loves, fears, and dreams, but you remain the witness. You see the movement of samsara as part of the dance of existence, no longer something to conquer. Even worry becomes a teacher, a bell that rings whenever you forget the present moment. Each time it rings, you wake a little more. And as this awareness stabilizes, the mind's spinning starts to feel lighter. Thoughts still arise, but they pass through like reflections on clear water. The old loops lose their gravity because craving and aversion have lost their roots. What remains is presence, simple, steady, alive. The wheel of samsara keeps turning in the world, but within you, something has stopped. You no longer revolve around fear or desire. You rest in the still point at the center, where freedom has always been. As the cycles of worry and craving lose their power, awareness begins to open like a sky after long rain. The storms of thought still come and go, but they no longer define you. You start to notice something extraordinary, that even though the world outside changes endlessly, your experience of peace or distress depends less on the events themselves and more on the state of your inner atmosphere. There are days when nothing terrible happens, yet the heart feels heavy. Other times, the same challenges arrive, but they pass through you like wind through leaves. What changed was not life, but your inner climate. This recognition marks a turning point. You begin to see that emotional life follows the same laws as nature. Moods shift like seasons. Energy rises and falls like tides. The problem is not the weather itself, but our resistance to it. Most people live like travelers without shelter, constantly reacting to every change in emotional temperature. When joy appears, they chase it. When sadness arrives, they run. The constant chasing and fleeing keep the heart in turmoil. True peace begins when you learn not to control the weather, but to regulate your inner climate, to create a steady warmth of awareness that remains stable no matter what storms pass through. Emotions are not enemies to be conquered. They are signals of movement, the atmosphere of consciousness. Just as the sky holds both sunlight and storm without preference, awareness can hold all emotions without collapsing into them. Learning this art is not suppression, it's regulation, the capacity to respond instead of react. It's how you move from being tossed by emotional winds to sailing with them. The first step in transforming emotional climate is awareness of pattern. Every emotion follows a rhythm, a rising, a peak, a dissolution. Most people interrupt this rhythm by reacting too soon. Anger arises and is expressed immediately. Fear appears and is resisted. Joy surfaces and is grasped tightly. In each case, the emotion never completes its natural arc. It gets trapped, stored in the body, waiting to be released. Over time, these incomplete cycles form emotional residue. the inner equivalent of pollution. Awareness clears this build-up by allowing emotions to move through fully without interference. To understand this process, observe your emotions throughout the day. Notice not only what you feel, but how long it lasts, how it moves, where it lives in the body. You'll begin to see that emotions are not permanent states, but waves. The problem arises when the mind identifies with the wave. I am angry. I am anxious. Instead of recognizing anger is passing through, anxiety is arising. The difference seems small, but it transforms your relationship with inner experience. You shift from being weather to being climate, from turbulence to steady awareness. Regulating emotional climate doesn't mean staying calm all the time. It means holding a stable base of consciousness from which all emotions can be felt safely. You stop dividing feelings into good and bad. You start treating each one as information, an internal message about your state of alignment. Anger, for instance, isn't evil. It signals that something feels out of balance or violated. Sadness isn't weakness. It points to loss or unmet depth. Joy isn't a prize. It's a sign that you're connected to flow. When you interpret emotions as teachers rather than problems, they become part of wisdom rather than obstacles to it. The body is the entry point to this awareness. Every emotion has a physical counterpart: tension, heat, heaviness, expansion. The mind spins stories, but the body tells the truth. When emotional weather feels overwhelming, shift attention from thought to sensation. Feel where the storm gathers. Maybe the chest tightens, the stomach knots, the throat constricts. Breathe into that space without analysis. The breath becomes a bridge between the turbulence of emotion and the stillness of awareness. This is how regulation begins, not by controlling feeling, but by allowing the body to ground it. Breathing practices from Buddhist and yogic traditions serve as tools for this. When you sense emotional heat rising, anger, frustration, impatience, lengthen the exhale. It activates the parasympathetic system, cooling the internal climate. When sadness or dullness settles like fog, deepen the inhale. It brings vitality back to the body. These small adjustments are powerful because they work through physiology, not willpower. You're not fighting emotion, you're restoring balance. Beyond breath, posture affects emotional weather. When anxiety strikes, the body curls inward, shoulders tighten, head lowers. This physical stance tells the brain that danger is near, reinforcing the emotional storm. Straightening the spine and relaxing the jaw can break the feedback loop. The body teaches the mind safety. Regulation is embodied awareness. The way you hold yourself determines the quality of your inner sky. Still, techniques alone are not enough. Lasting transformation comes from insight, understanding the impermanent nature of emotions themselves. When you truly see that every feeling changes, you stop clinging to pleasure and fearing pain. The mind stops making long-term predictions based on short-term states. You realize that moods are weather, not identity. Clouds form, rain falls, and then the sun returns. Nothing needs to be fixed. Everything needs to be seen. This insight also changes how you relate to others. Emotional contagion is real. The energy of one person can affect many. When you stabilize your inner climate, you become a calm center in a chaotic world. People feel safe around steadiness. You start influencing others not by words, but by presence. When you enter a tense space and stay grounded, the collective nervous system unconsciously entrains to your calm. This is how self-regulation becomes service. However, maintaining a balanced inner climate doesn't mean denying intensity. There are moments when grief must be deep, anger must be expressed, tears must flow. Regulation doesn't suppress expression, it provides a container for it. It means expressing consciously rather than impulsively. You can speak truth without violence, cry without drowning, act without losing awareness. Each emotion, when honored rather than dramatized, purifies itself. To refine this skill, it helps to see emotions as weather systems with predictable conditions. Some people live in constant internal winter, contracted, cautious, defensive. Others stay in perpetual summer, bright but restless, unable to pause. The goal isn't to choose one over the other, but to develop emotional seasons consciously. Sometimes you need the stillness of winter, the letting go. Sometimes you need the growth of spring, the boldness of summer, the reflection of autumn. Awareness lets you move through these inner seasons without confusion. Regulation also involves knowing the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is automatic. It's the thunder that follows the flash. Response is chosen. It's awareness shaping the next moment. The gap between the two is where freedom lives. In that gap, you can feel emotion fully and decide how to act. You might notice anger, but choose clarity instead of aggression. You might feel fear, but choose patience instead of retreat. Emotional maturity is not the absence of emotion, it's mastery of response. One of the greatest obstacles to this mastery is judgment. The mind labels emotions as good or bad, productive or destructive. But labeling limits understanding. For example, many people suppress anger because they see it as unspiritual. Yet repressed anger turns into resentment, which corrodes peace. When you allow anger to express as energy, through movement, voice, or writing, it transforms into strength and boundary. Every emotion, when accepted, has a wisdom hidden inside. Meditation supports this transformation by strengthening awareness of the emotional field. In meditation, you begin to watch feelings rise like weather patterns, a wave of restlessness, a drizzle of sadness, a burst of joy. You don't chase them or push them away. You sit as the sky, vast and unchanging. Over time, this awareness carries into daily life. The same steadiness you feel in stillness begins to accompany movement. You start meeting life's events as a stable climate rather than as unpredictable weather. This steadiness is what the Buddha meant by liberation from dukkha, not the elimination of suffering, but the end of identification with it. Emotions still arise, but they no longer imprison you. Even pain becomes bearable when you stop making it personal. This is sadness, becomes "I am sad" only when the ego claims ownership. Letting go of ownership releases half the suffering immediately. You learn to host emotions rather than become them. Regulating inner climate also requires nourishment. The emotional system, like the physical one, needs rest, reflection, and care. When you're exhausted, regulation becomes impossible. Sleep, nature, silence, and mindful movement replenish the nervous system. Gratitude practices strengthen the foundation of well-being, acting like sunlight for the emotional body. When gratitude becomes habitual, it stabilizes mood by orienting awareness toward abundance instead of lack. Another form of nourishment is truth. Emotional imbalance often comes from resisting what is true. Denial traps energy. Honesty releases it. When you admit fear, you free the courage to face it. When you acknowledge sadness, you create space for comfort. Truth allows the emotional weather to clear naturally. Pretending to be fine only deepens turbulence. Authenticity, even when messy, aligns you with reality, and reality is always stable beneath appearances. Over time, regulating emotional weather turns into a form of artistry. You start sensing subtle shifts, a tone of impatience, a trace of jealousy, a drop in enthusiasm, before they become storms. You learn to adjust early, a few breaths, a pause, a kind word to yourself. Just as a gardener tends soil daily rather than waiting for drought, you care for your emotional environment moment by moment. Prevention becomes easier than repair. You also begin to sense collective emotional climates, workplaces charged with tension, families vibrating with unspoken fear, cities pulsing with anxiety. Instead of being absorbed by them, you hold presence as an anchor. You contribute clarity without absorbing confusion. You respond with empathy, but maintain boundaries. This is how awareness becomes protection, not a wall, but a field of stability that keeps chaos from entering. Eventually, you stop seeing emotions as separate from awareness at all. They are waves on the same ocean, expressions of energy moving through form. You no longer need to manage them constantly because they regulate themselves within your stillness. Like wind passing through open space, emotion moves cleanly, leaving no residue. The body feels lighter, thought less noisy, heart more open. When this steadiness matures, peace ceases to be fragile. You can face difficult people, unpredictable situations, even loss, without losing balance. The world remains as it is, changing, imperfect, alive. But within you, there's a climate of gentle equanimity. This doesn't make life dull, it makes it vivid. You feel more, not less, because you're not afraid to feel. Each emotion becomes texture, each moment a new shade of sky. Emotional regulation, then, is not about becoming neutral, but about becoming vast enough to contain everything. The more space awareness holds, the less turbulence can dominate. Your calm becomes inclusive, not exclusive. Joy and grief, excitement and fatigue, all are welcome. This inclusiveness is freedom, not detachment. You no longer need to control the forecast because you trust the stability of your own atmosphere. Through this inner stability, compassion deepens. You begin to see that everyone's emotional weather is temporary, even the storms of those who hurt you. Anger in another is just thunder seeking release. Fear is fog needing warmth. When you understand this, you stop taking things personally. You meet others' storms with empathy rather than resistance. In doing so, you help regulate the collective climate, one calm presence at a time. As awareness continues to expand, the emotional landscape grows quiet without becoming empty. Feelings still rise, but they pass gently, leaving clarity behind. Life keeps changing, but within you, There's a consistency, a sky that no longer fears clouds. This inner climate isn't about perfection, it's about harmony. It's about knowing that peace isn't the absence of weather, but the art of staying centered through it. When the inner climate begins to stabilize, something extraordinary becomes visible. The hidden patterns that once seemed chaotic now reveal their purpose. The storms that used to feel meaningless start to show rhythm and intelligence. You begin to see that even pain, loss, and discomfort have their place in the great balance of life. They are not intruders in your peace, they are part of its making. And yet, this recognition is not easy. The heart naturally resists what hurts. It craves warmth and avoids cold, seeks pleasure and rejects pain. But what if the deepest form of gratitude doesn't come from what pleases you, but from what challenges you? What if the path to wisdom runs directly through the landscape of suffering, not around it? The Buddha taught that dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness woven into existence, is not a mistake to be corrected, but a teacher to be studied. It's not punishment, but instruction. Most people hear life is suffering and assume Buddhism is pessimistic. In truth, it's deeply optimistic because it sees suffering as the doorway to awakening. Without friction, there is no transformation. Without imperfection, no humility. Without loss, no love deep enough to transcend possession. The practice of gratitude beyond preference is learning to thank life not only for what comforts you, but for what breaks you open. Ordinary gratitude is conditional. It says, "I'm thankful because things are good." But deeper gratitude says, "I'm thankful because I can see." It recognizes that wisdom grows through difficulty. When something hurts, it reveals attachment. When something ends, it reveals impermanence. When something disappoints, it reveals expectation. Gratitude beyond preference is the willingness to meet pain with curiosity instead of resistance, to bow to it as a teacher instead of fighting it as an enemy. This doesn't mean seeking suffering or pretending to enjoy it. It means seeing clearly that pain and pleasure are part of the same unfolding. One refines the other. Joy without sorrow would be shallow, and sorrow without joy would be unbearable. Gratitude in the Buddhist sense is not emotional positivity, it's clarity. It's the understanding that every moment, pleasant or painful, contributes to awakening. Even confusion, when seen clearly, reveals truth. When something painful happens, an illness, betrayal, loss, the ego's reflex is to contract. It says, "Why me?" It searches for blame, for reasons, for escape. But awareness asks a different question. What is this showing me? This shift transforms the experience completely. Instead of being trapped in reaction, you begin to learn from reality itself. Pain becomes a mirror reflecting the parts of you still clinging to permanence. Gratitude arises naturally from that seeing, not because the pain feels good, but because it teaches freedom. The practice begins in small moments. When frustration arises, instead of judging it, you acknowledge it. "Thank you for showing me my attachment to control." When fear appears, you say, "Thank you for revealing where trust is missing." When grief surfaces, you whisper, "Thank you for deepening my love." These simple acknowledgements break the reflex of resistance. They turn emotion into awareness. Gratitude stops being an intellectual exercise and becomes an embodied response to life. Pain refines perception. It slows you down, forcing presence where distraction once lived. It exposes illusions of control, permanence, and identity. Without discomfort, you might never question the habits that limit you. Gratitude beyond preference doesn't glorify pain. It recognizes its usefulness. It's like fire, destructive when resisted, purifying when embraced with wisdom. The moment you stop labeling experiences as bad, they start to reveal their meaning. Buddhist teachings often compare suffering to the grit that polishes a jewel. The jewel is awareness. The grit is life. Every difficulty rubs against the ego, wearing down its edges until transparency appears. Gratitude in this context means honoring the polishing process, even when it feels harsh. You may not be grateful for the pain itself, but you can be grateful for what it reveals. This is not passive acceptance, but active insight, the alchemy of turning suffering into wisdom. In this light, the concept of dukkha becomes revolutionary. Instead of running from discomfort, you begin to study it. You notice how resistance amplifies pain. A physical ache hurts, but it's the thought, "this shouldn't be happening," that multiplies the suffering. Gratitude beyond preference dissolves that secondary layer. It accepts the first arrow of pain, but refuses the second arrow of resistance. The mind stops fighting reality and begins cooperating with it. To cultivate this gratitude, mindfulness is essential. When pain arises, bring full attention to it, not as a problem to fix, but as energy to feel. Watch how the mind contracts around it, how it builds stories of injustice or fear. Then bring attention back to the raw sensation, the tightness, the heat, the trembling. Awareness itself has healing power. The more you stay with direct experience, the more the story loses its grip. The heart opens to the simple fact of being alive, even in difficulty. This openness reveals compassion, first for yourself, then for others. When you see how deeply pain can teach, you stop judging those who suffer. You understand that every being is walking through their own fires of transformation. Gratitude for your own trials naturally expands into empathy for the collective. You begin to see the shared humanity in suffering, the universal longing for relief, love, and understanding. Gratitude transforms from a personal feeling into a recognition of interconnectedness. There's a quiet dignity that arises when you stop rejecting pain. You no longer waste energy pretending to be invulnerable. You can meet life honestly with both tenderness and strength. Gratitude beyond preference doesn't make you passive, it makes you resilient. It's not about giving up on change, it's about changing from wisdom instead of fear. When you accept reality fully, your actions become aligned, not reactive. In the depths of grief or loss, this practice becomes both the hardest and the most transformative. When someone you love is gone, gratitude feels impossible. But over time, awareness softens the edges. The grief that once felt like destruction becomes a form of connection, a reminder that love itself doesn't die. You start to feel gratitude for having loved at all, for having felt deeply enough to mourn. The pain becomes proof of life, a silent teacher of compassion. This kind of gratitude cannot be forced. It arises naturally when resistance dissolves. The mind may rebel at first, saying, "I can't be thankful for this." That's fine. Gratitude is not a command, it's a discovery. It grows when you stop demanding that life match your preferences. When the grip of expectation loosens, even suffering reveals unexpected beauty, a depth of awareness, a tenderness of heart, a humility that success could never teach. Over time, you start seeing this truth in everyday challenges. A delay teaches patience. A failure teaches humility. A conflict reveals attachment. Each moment becomes part of your education in awareness. Life itself becomes the teacher, and gratitude becomes your natural language. The division between good and bad experiences fades. Everything becomes nourishment for awakening. One of the most powerful insights of Buddhist psychology is that suffering is not an error in the system. It's the system working perfectly to wake you up. When something hurts, it's life showing you where illusion still hides. If you meet that pain with resistance, you reinforce the illusion. If you meet it with curiosity and gratitude, the illusion dissolves. Gratitude turns pain into a mirror reflecting truth. This doesn't mean bypassing emotion. Gratitude is not denial, it's depth. You can feel grief and still be grateful for awareness itself. You can experience anger and still be grateful for the chance to learn from it. The key is honesty, feeling everything without distortion. When gratitude includes even what hurts, it stops being selective and becomes unconditional. It becomes not a mood, but a way of seeing. This kind of gratitude also reshapes how you understand happiness. Ordinary happiness depends on pleasant conditions, health, success, love. But unconditional gratitude reveals a deeper happiness that doesn't vanish when conditions change. It's a peace that arises from inclusion rather than exclusion. Nothing is outside of your acceptance. This is the heart of Buddhist freedom, the ability to meet each moment as worthy of reverence. To develop this, practice reflection. At the end of the day, instead of listing what went well, look at what was difficult and ask, what did this teach me? It might show you patience, humility, or surrender. This is not moralizing, but awakening insight. Each difficulty becomes a doorway to self-knowledge. Over time, the heart learns to thank life not for comfort, but for consciousness. Gratitude beyond preference also deepens your relationship with impermanence. When you realize everything is passing, every moment becomes precious. Even pain becomes fleeting, and that awareness lightens it. You start to appreciate the temporary nature of all things, the rise and fall, the birth and decay. Gratitude becomes an act of love for transience itself, for the fragile beauty of existence. When this understanding matures, the line between joy and sorrow blurs. You begin to feel both at once, joy within sorrow, sorrow within joy. Gratitude becomes vast enough to hold contradictions. It allows you to smile through tears, to see meaning even in endings. This is not duality, but wholeness, the full embrace of life as it is. The Buddha often spoke of mudita, sympathetic joy, as the counterpart to compassion. Gratitude beyond preference naturally gives birth to this joy. When you stop resisting your own suffering, You start celebrating others' happiness without envy. You recognize the interconnectedness of all experience. Every joy, even if not your own, becomes reason for gratitude because it reflects the shared potential for awakening. In daily life, this practice makes you softer, less reactive, more at ease with uncertainty. When something painful happens, instead of spiraling into, "Why me?" you start asking, "What now?" You meet difficulty as part of the path, not as a detour. You learn to trust that pain, when faced with awareness, always leaves you wiser than it found you. That trust is the essence of faith in the Buddhist sense, not belief in dogma, but confidence in the intelligence of experience. Gratitude beyond preference also dissolves comparison. When you stop dividing life into favorable and unfavorable, you stop measuring yourself against others. You no longer need to win at life. You need only to live it fully. This releases tremendous energy once spent on envy, regret, and self-criticism. That energy turns into compassion, the natural impulse to share what you've discovered. Eventually, gratitude ceases to depend on content. It becomes a constant tone beneath the changing melody of life. Even when sadness plays, gratitude hums quietly underneath. It's the awareness that simply being alive, able to feel and learn, is enough. You stop demanding that life be easier. You start marveling at its depth. This is the quiet joy of awakening, the realization that nothing is wasted, not even suffering. When the heart reaches this depth of gratitude, it no longer needs to seek meaning in pain. It experiences meaning through pain. Every tear, every mistake, every loss becomes part of the same sacred pattern. The world doesn't become perfect, but your relationship with it does. Gratitude becomes your natural response to existence, not as a reaction, but as a state of being, where even hurt becomes holy, and every moment, however difficult, is worthy of a silent bow. In the end, peace was never something distant. It was waiting in the space beneath your thoughts, beneath your fears, beneath the endless noise of wanting life to be different. Through every lesson, from seeing the arrogance hidden in worry, to learning the physics of letting go, to loving without ownership, to finding freedom in the word enough, and discovering the stillness inside silence, you've walked the same path the Buddha described thousands of years ago, the path from resistance to presence. Each teaching pointed to the same truth. Life doesn't need to be controlled to be beautiful. When you stop interfering, life balances itself. When you stop chasing, happiness finds you. When you stop clinging, love expands. And when you begin to see even pain as part of your awakening, nothing is wasted, not even your suffering. You've seen that worry is just samsara in disguise, that emotions are weather, not identity, that gratitude transforms pain into light. What remains now is practice, small, daily choices to return to awareness when the mind begins to spin. To breathe before reacting, to trust the rhythm of things, to live with open hands instead of clenched fists. If these lessons spoke to something in you, share your voice below. Write one thing you're choosing to let go of, or one insight that opened your heart today. Your words might be the reminder someone else needs to read. And if you want to keep walking this path of calm, compassion, and clarity together, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell, because this is just the beginning of the journey toward a quieter, stronger, and freer mind.